This is the Board of Directors for the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon's board meeting, and also known as TriMet. So I point out that we're going to begin with our public forum as we always do, and we have this for 45 minutes. All depends on the number of the speakers. We finish early, we'll go right into our business meeting. Individual comments are limited to 2 or 3 minutes. We'll make it 3 minutes today. I want everybody to know, either was watching it on TV or in the audience, this is an opportunity for people to sign up and talk to the board about issues of concern regarding the agency or any issues we have on the agenda. It's also an opportunity, if we aren't able to help you, if it's not in the purview of the board, we'll ask staff to maybe get together with whoever's commented to see if we can steer them to the right agency or the right place for the solution of their issues. We also will try to address some of the response to some of what we may hear if possible, and the general manager will be there afterwards, and the general manager comments to provide us those answers if we have those at this time. I'd point out there's 4 people who've signed up today, and I'm going to call you up 2 at a time. And again, the timer, I think you know, those of you who've been here have a timer that shows you when the 3 minutes is up, gives you a little warning about 30 seconds before it turns red. So the first 2 are R.A. Fonts and Chris Walker. You guys are too polite to one another. Mr. Fonts, I think you're first.
Okay, thank you. R.A. Fonts, Lake Oswego. Good morning.
Good morning.
Director Stovall offered a very real glimmer of hope this spring when he expressed his dismay that despite all the real improvements TriMet was making, ridership is dropping. For what may have been the first time in many years, a person with official responsibility publicly expressed concern about the overall direction of TriMet. Now you all have these ones with the charts on, and notice that this only covers the first 16 years of this century. It's only in this century that we've seen the 4 max GORI lines, green, orange, red, yellow, streetcar, and WES. In the top chart, the blue line shows per capita ridership, and it's been essentially flat, but trending down since 2009. All the other lines represent different aspects of costs. They all trend up and are now around 20% higher than they were 17 years ago. TriMet is becoming less productive over time. Just prior to WES's 2009 grand opening, media were reporting that TriMet expected 2,400 daily WES riders the first year and 4,600 daily riders by 2020. Then, in April 2014, during the first pitch for additional WES cars, staff came up with, quote, original projections, close quote, with dramatically lower numbers than those promulgated 5 years earlier. So instantly, WES was on its way to magically outperform projections and would desperately need more cars to meet 2016 demand. Well, we all know now that the Ghost Riders of 2016 never showed, that ridership has never met projections, and that no one has come up with any kind of credible scenario where WES will be anything other than a disproportionate drain on resources. It needs to be shut down. If not today, when? What has to happen before TriMet can start to be honest about WES? The core of the problem with both WES and streetcar is that they are both more expensive to operate than available alternatives. The only way they can be cost effective would be if riders became so infatuated with these rail systems that people would be climbing all over each other and paying premium fares for WES and streetcar rides. That's not happening, and TriMet is super subsidizing them with higher taxes, higher fares, and lower service levels for those of us who depend upon bus and max. Does anyone really think that's sustainable? Now, light rail is different. There is a large Goldilocks zone where roughly between 150 and 260 rides per trip through each line's maximum load section where it would be really efficient. But that's not happening. Max is underperforming, averaging roughly 65 to 100 rides through the zone, and the vehicle automation is set to eliminate the zone entirely once we start seeing automation. We can also expect that many riders, but not all, will leave transit in favor of autonomous vehicles. TriMet will be under great pressure. If it survives, we can expect it to be much smaller, more narrowly focused, and most of all, far more efficiently operated. If TriMet fails, it will not be because of outside challenges, but because of management's inability to prepare and adapt. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. Chris Walker with CAT. Just wanted to talk about a couple of service things. The mall downtown is really having a hard time for individuals who are disabled, knowing what stop is the correct stop to wait at for the lift and what stop they should be at, because sometimes I'll get dropped off at one location and I find out, oh no, you need to be at the other location for the pickup. The driver didn't drop you off in the right spot. Other times the drivers have to compete with the big buses or trucks or whatever who are parked in our zones where we're supposed to be dropped off at, and it becomes hard to figure out where we're supposed to be. And so I think that a fresh look between the board and CAT should be had at where our bus stops should be placed. Signage is important. I looked all over Pioneer Square area a couple Thursdays ago because I was dropped off down there, but I think drivers make up where they're supposed to stop on their own, and it's hard to figure out where people are. And if you get left, you get left, and sometimes people don't have a phone, and it's hard to communicate with dispatch. So that's one issue. And then the other issue I've heard about and I've experienced myself is when we moved the service area because of the economic downturn back in '09, I think it was, or something like that. The service area was smaller, and there was not room for extra, we didn't have enough service, enough money for the service. Now, we've added we're looking to add rapid transit and all these things, and I think that the service area boundaries need to be considered before we add anything else, because we're all over the cities. There's growing housing, there's different developments going on, and there's a real need for the service. And so I think it's very important that you take a look at the service and where we should increase service. So it hasn't gone off. Then finally, oh well, there we go.
Thank you, Chris. Those are helpful, and we'll look at both of those. Mr. Fonce, I don't know whether you looked at our agenda. I want to make sure you know that. Now, in our briefings, we have a ridership analysis. This board is very concerned about our flat ridership, and in fact, what we would like to figure out how to do is increase dramatically the ridership in the region. So stay tuned. If you're able to stick around, I think you might find some of the information data that the staff has developed interesting.
Thank you. I just had the opportunity to speak briefly with Mr. Bottomley, so.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Yeah. All right. The next two are David Bouchard and J.T. Norton.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm David Bouchard, and I am a member of Bus Riders Unite, but I'm really here just testifying on pretty much my own behalf. And I wanted to talk about, I know that today you're going to have a presentation on the unfortunate ridership trends that we're experiencing. And first of all, I want to say that it's great that you guys are concerned, because that is the first step to improving our situation. And I also want to say that I've, over the past months and maybe year or two, I've heard a lot of reasons why ridership is going down nationally. People, you've heard it: gas prices, Lyft and Uber, teleworking, things like that. But I want to caution you to not focus only on those factors as the only reasons, or the main. Even, I mean, Uber and Lyft, that's a problem. But I think what you need to focus on, what can TriMet do with its services to compete with some of these other things like Uber and Lyft. For instance, those two services now have monthly passes. You pay $5, and then you get 20 rides for $5, up to $25, and that is going to pull people away from your services, because the service that you have, a lot of it is so slow, and because a lot of the services is just not rapid, and the crosstown service is really going to need to improve. So really ask yourselves, what can you do to improve the crosstown bus service and the frequency of your buses, especially because there's a lot of lines that, for instance, like the 17 or the 19 or a lot of other lines, that are in areas that have a lot of development, but the frequency is not where it needs to be. You could look at increasing, your frequent service standard across the board and adding some improvements with off-peak service, maybe even eventually having a lower frequency standard, because you need to build your frequency, you need to build your off-peak ridership to get people to come back to your buses and the MAX, because one of the reasons that people feel unsafe on the MAX is that oftentimes it's not crowded, especially at night, because your off-peak service is so low, only every 30 minutes for a lot of lines. And people don't feel safe with that. But if you can increase your frequency and really focus on doing development, or housing and whatnot, instead of park and rides, you'll probably have a lot of those safety issues go away as it becomes more populated, and it will feel safer. Thanks.
No, thank you. Your points are well taken, and we will be having some good discussions about most all of those. So thank you for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Norton.
Good morning. My name is Justin Norton. I am here to speak to a personal concern relating to fare inspection dating back to 2014. I've tried to address this matter through Multnomah Circuit Court. I've sent some of you an email as well back in 2014, 2015 to try and gain clarity as to how that process works. And based on my personal experience, I was cited for no proof of fare with one other individual in 2014, okay? The unusual part about the situation is that that same individual and I boarded the same train, same platform, same day, same time. We deboarded at the same platform, which was in the Yamhill district. We encountered two separate fare inspectors. One is James Takey, the other one is John Cromley, I believe. We're standing side by side. The situation was that there was a vending machine that was not functioning properly. I've experienced that before. I've contacted customer service TriMet to express concerns about that. In response to that, customer service has said, you can board a train, board a bus, the driver will be more than willing to help you to get where you need to go, okay? In this experience, I observed the individual next to me, okay, having a warning issued for the exact same reason that a citation was issued to me. The citation that was issued to me carried a monetary value. And I'm trying to gain understanding as to how that policy is structured to avoid situations like And I'm not claiming that that's the case because I don't know, but it certainly seems to leave the door open for discrimination. It seems unusual that two individuals, same place, same time, same reason for being stopped, have two very different outcomes. And this is something that, again, I tried to address through Multnomah Circuit Court. When I went to court, okay, I brought a document from TriMet, from I think it was Kimberly Akimoto, that showed that I have absolutely no citations whatsoever, no warnings, no other citations ever issued. And this is spanning a time now of 5 years, I think, over that. In addition to that, I brought over, I think, 300 documents, paper tickets showing that I do in fact pay fare. I was told by that judge to be quiet and was issued a citation or the full amount for that citation. So again, what I'm seeking is clarity to how that process works. And my understanding of policy is that it's written and designed to address concerns related to folks who abuse services and systems. I'm clearly not doing that. And however, I'm obviously being punished for that. Okay? Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for your time. I will point out, whether you're aware of some of the things that are going on at TriMet, but maybe we could have somebody talk with him about some of the changes we're making in fare enforcement, and to ensure we don't have disparate, have disparate conditions and citations being issued. And I think we're trying to figure out a way to obviously not have it be something that could end up on somebody's record as a criminal offense. So there's a lot of things we're doing. I'm sorry that you saw the specific, in your case, somebody with a different.
It simply seems to be an unfair practice.
Yeah, and so I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you bringing it forward, and I'm hoping maybe we can get some, address some of this, individually with you and the staff. So thanks for coming in and taking the time. Really
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that's all the people I have signed up today for the public forum. Is there anybody who missed the sign-up sheet for the public forum who would like to address the board since we have a few extra minutes? Okay, seeing none then, I'm going to move into our regular business meeting, and I would like to call to order the TriMet Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, September 27th, 2017 to order. All right, and the first items we have on our agenda today are our board reports, and the first one is on the Committee for Accessible Transportation, CAT, and I understand that Commissioner Baumann is sick this morning, so I don't believe we're going to have a report on that unless somebody else wants to give that report on her behalf.
I think I'm not sure we have anybody here who can really do that effectively.
All right, then we'll defer that again until we hear what's going on next meeting. Dr. Bethel, you just walked in. Are you ready to give us a report on the Transit Equity Advisory Committee?
Good morning, Mr. President.
Good morning.
Board.
Morning.
Yes, in the last TAC meeting, Eric Van Hagen from TriMet's legal department provided an update on the administrative hearing process and TriMet's efforts to decriminalize fare evasion while creating more options for those found without fare, which speaks to what our last person spoke to in a public comment. Some TIAC members will participate as well as identify candidates to work to build out recommendations related to HB 2777 and the administrative hearing process, fines for fare evasion, and the options for community service. John Gardner updated TIAC on the ongoing efforts related to launching a low-income fare program next summer and reported on the lessons learned from Seattle's Orca Lift low-income fare program. Next up for the Diversity and Transit Equity team is a series of local conversations with over 100 local community-based organizations to gather feedback and input on the framework for TriMet's low-income fare program as well as other related initiatives. Finally, TIAC also touched base on their efforts in developing an equity lens tool that can be leveraged to support ongoing efforts across TriMet. Thank you. I'll take any questions if anyone has.
Thank you. Is there any questions of Dr. Bethel about the TIAC committee? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being prepared here to be able to get right to it. All right, the next one is the Finance and Audit Committee meeting report. Director Prosser.
And my apologies to everybody, I'm having trouble with my voice, so.
We'll listen carefully.
We met this morning. We had a briefing from Bernie Bottomley regarding the potential of the Southwest Corridor bond and where things stand now with the timeline and the work to be done. We had a discussion with Shelley Devine regarding proposed changes to the delegated authority levels. And this relates to when items come to the board and when they can be signed off by staff. And staff will be proposing some changes, so we got a preview of that. We heard from the general manager, and we'll have the general manager report, so I won't duplicate that. And then we also heard from the auditors, giving us our audit report, which I won't steal their thunder, except to say it's a good one. So, and that's it.
Thank you. Any questions about the Finance Audit Committee? Joe, did you?
No,
Okay.
just, no.
Should we make him try to keep talking and give us an update on
That was
the
kind of my thought.
Metro Policy Advisory Committee? Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's actually been 2 meetings since the board last met. We got an update on the urban growth forecast modeling that they do every year. They have to forecast the population growth in the area. And then last meeting, we got an update on their equitable housing initiative and a Metro-led project to support more diversity in the region's construction workforce. And our staff has been working with Metro on that. And so we've been also sharing information about our DBE contracting. So, and that's it.
I feel bad about you. Seeing if there's any questions for you here. I don't see any questions.
Wonderful.
Very good.
I not a question, just a comment. I'd like to hear more some other time about this diversity in construction efforts from Metro,
Okay.
et cetera.
There was a PowerPoint.
Of course.
That staff prepared, and maybe our staff could get a copy of that for Joe.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. All right, then the last board report is mine, which was added to the agenda today because this is the board's opportunity to publicly review the performance of our general manager over the past year. We do this every year, so everybody watching this knows that. And I've had the pleasure of working with the board on putting together the evaluation of his performance that you have a final version of in your packets here this morning. And what I wanted to do is just very quickly let the board, anybody listening, that the board believes that Neil's performance has been impressive in meeting the board's objectives during this last fiscal year, or actually calendar year from July 1st to June 30th, which does happen to also be our fiscal year. Overall, Neil's done a great job to meet and in most cases far exceed our expectations on most of the business objectives and the duties and responsibilities of the general manager. This evaluation goes on to really talk about a number of issues that the general manager has performed exceedingly well, and I would point out he can't do it without the staff, and what that means is he's got some good staff and has been managing them properly to get the results. I would just point out that in the board's priorities, continuing focus on advancing safety has been a continual issue for the board. We were pleased that the work that the agency has done in terms of creating a safety management system. We're really pleased with the audit that was done on our rail safety, which again, I'm also pleased that Doug and his staff have really responded to most of those issues. We're also pleased that we're trying to get a handle on how to deal with assaults on our operators and some of the innovative and prototype things that you're trying. Hopefully we'll have some good results. And we know that that's still a work in progress, and we'll look forward to some further work on that. And I think that the review does note that You know, TriMet was rocked by the brutal stabbings on Max in May of 2016, but we think the staff and Neil in particular did a really great job of responding to that and dealing with some additional resources to, again, help people continue to be safe and feel safe on our system. I wanted to also point out, in terms of the board's desires to improve customer service and on-time performance, I think that the agency has done a remarkable job of starting to actually report and measure our performance, and I think it's shown that our on-time performance in rail has improved, where we actually can get to a 90% level of on-time performance, which is really good. The board knows it's a little more difficult for the bus side, and we need to work with our partners to make this happen. But we're pleased with the progress that's being made. I also, in this area, wanted to point out that we've been receiving significant input about the need to move forward in securing an all-electric fleet, especially in the division project. And we're pleased that Neil is getting some smart guys on board to help us in terms of making some decisions that will allow us to determine if the market and the technology is there to allow us to do that. And because I think this board would like to see us get to as green a fleet as possible. We want to make sure we're doing it smartly, and we're not on the bleeding edge, as I call it. I would say that the business plan work that Neil has done with Doug and with a couple of our board members in terms of identifying our priorities and key metrics has been phenomenal. Your work, Neil, on helping advance the new regional transit corridor projects, the Division Street Rapid Transit project, as well as the Southwest Corridor light rail projects, are just examples. We also know there's some funding issues yet to be resolved on that, but based on the work that you've done to date, I feel like we're in good hands to get these issues resolved. We don't know what the ultimate solution will be, but we know that with your steady hand, we'll be able to get us there in that. In terms of just kind of the other areas, in terms of strengthening staff, I think it's fair to say that the board has always wanted to make sure that diversity, especially at the senior level, is really, reflects the community we serve. So we're looking forward to some further efforts in that area as the baby boomers start to retire. So I think we know this is also a long-term goal, but we're pleased with the progress that's started to be made, and we're looking for some more. We also think your work on succession planning and training has been very helpful for the organization. And I can't go without saying that the organization did an unbelievably good job in terms of the implementation of the hop card. It's nice to have an IT and a hardware project actually be done right, on time and on budget, rather than being a headline in the Oregonian about something's gone wrong and we need to abandon the system. So I think this is going to fit real well with our low-income fare program that we'll see implemented hopefully in the next year. And we couldn't do that without this hop card being in place. So good work on that, Neil. I also, for the record, want to note that this board has been very pleased with the work that Neil and his staff have done in terms of improving our delivery of capital projects, which means a lot of focus on making sure that these projects are actually able to be delivered in the fiscal year in which they're planned. And if our eyes are bigger than our delivery, let's make sure we have a schedule that actually reflects what needs to be done, so we don't set aside money that could be used for other things. So I think you've done a great job on that, Neil, and Doug needs to be also complimented for his work on that. I noted we're also pleased that the labor negotiations are continuing to go well. I think we've done a good job of limiting our desires in the negotiating process, and hopefully we can come to an amicable settlement that reflects both management and unions' desires on that. And then the last thing I would really want to note is I think this agency made some major strides forward in our social equity initiatives. And I point out the low-income fare task force and ultimately the approval of a funding package at the state legislature, which I believe our commitment to this program and the people who were involved in this is a good reason why we actually have a new source of revenue statewide for transit the first time ever. So great work on that. I think we heard a little bit about fair enforcement today. I think our review of fair enforcement in terms of disparity and ways to change our fair enforcement that also resulted in state law changes were very, very beneficial. And I would just say that we continue to be a leader in expectations of utilizing disadvantaged business enterprises and employing women and minorities in our construction and projects we do. So overall, I think, you know, I who wrote most of this, feel very good about your performance. And again, this review does incorporate the comments I've received from the other board members. And so with that, I think I would, ultimately, I want the board to endorse the performance review. So you can either make a motion now to approve that and get it seconded and have a discussion, or I'll leave it to you to have a discussion and see if you agree with my assessment and so on. So anybody want to start on this?
So moved.
Oh, so you're making a motion to it?
Yep.
Okay,
Second.
all right.
What was that?
That was a second, I think I heard it. All right, so let's discuss the motion. Obviously, you know where I stand. Think you can make words still?
I'll try.
Okay.
I appreciate Bruce taking the lead and putting this together and giving us the opportunity for input. And I did submit comments which are reflected here. And I think this has been a very good year for TriMet. And you know, I appreciate the work of all the staff, and I particularly appreciate your leadership and interest in not just getting the job done, but getting it done well. And I'm going to leave it there for now. There's a lot more I could say if I had a voice. So.
Go ahead.
I reviewed the material and spoke to Bruce about it, and I concur with everything Bruce said and Craig said too. You know, I'm just really impressed with not just your leadership, but the staff that you've put together to drive this organization, and the things that you've done, the really human side of keeping the board informed, and the way you've run this agency. I'm just so impressed. And I'm the new board member just since January, and so we've had a difficult last 8 months, and no one is ever really prepared to handle some of the things that this agency has held, and you and your team have responded really admirably and in sometimes not easy circumstances. So thank you.
Go ahead, doctor. You're the doctor to me.
Well, I concur with the assessment, and Mr. General Manager, you know, my whole push is that the senior staff needs diversity. It's a very hard cry for that. And I know in some of the occasions that we've tried, it's been difficult. I do want to encourage you to continue to push for that, but also on the level to push to those who are heads of departments that there must be some intentionality in terms of looking, searching. Even that means you bringing a person on and beginning to work with them so that they can advance. Many times when we look at things, we look and say, well, this is the best candidate, and we want the best candidates, but sometimes the others have not had an opportunity to do that. And in this time, organizations where the entire top staff is 99 to 99.9% all of white and don't really have the diversity in terms of ethnicity, we need to do some work. And TriMet serves a great population of people who are ethnic with diversity, and it would be good to see some diversity in the top senior staff. But not only that, in terms of getting them there, working on a retention plan that keeps them there so that they can continue to produce and move forward. Other than that, been a great, turbulent year, but we all came out in this topsy-turvy world with our feet still on the ground and a determination to keep pushing forward. And that's what I applaud, and that's what I'm still supporting.
Thank you. Director Esmond?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what everybody said, especially Dr. Bethel, about diversity. We need to do more, and I think we're trying to do that. And I think from having spent 4 or 5 days at a convention with other people, other agencies like ours from across the country, there's a lot of big projects out there that wanting to recruit people of women and people of color. So we're, but that being said, having mentorships underneath is, I think we're going to do it. I know we're going to do it. So, yeah, and it's been a tough year, very tough year. And you've done a great job, Neil, and quite frankly, I think you're underpaid, so I appreciate that. Some of the staff is too, but I know they're very loyal staff, very loyal. And they all behaved themselves over in Denver. So I got my checklist here. So, but anyway, thank you for your service. I'm sure it ain't easy every day.
And related to the compensation, I forgot to mention that it also, I recommended a 3% salary adjustment as a result of this. It's an upward salary adjustment, by the way, as a result of this performance evaluation. So, with that, is there any further discussion on the motion to approve the performance evaluation? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the performance evaluation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved. Congratulations, Mr.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I would point out that I would like the board to maybe also make a motion to authorize me to execute a extension of Neil's contract to reflect the terms that we just discussed, as well as the past terms that we have in the contract.
So moved, Mr.
Yeah.
President.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion on that motion?
No.
Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you. Mr. General Manager, did you wish to say anything about our evaluation?
Well, I would, and again, I'm humbled by your comments. Very grateful for your support, and I know that your comments integrated what would be my fundamental response, which is, thank heavens for a great staff. There are, nearly 3,000 people now providing the services that TriMet provides, and they do so in an amazing way and respond in a high quality way. We are and my thanks particularly to the executive team, who I work with directly, but also, frankly, to everyone at TriMet who does a great job in delivering the service to our customers. So that's the first response that I have. And I would just also note that my review of the written response is underlining all of the things that we need to focus on, including what Dr. Bethel brought up, and diversity of the staff and development of the staff. We have a number of programs underway that we'll continue to brief you on that are aimed in that direction. One of the things about TriMet is when you sort of develop a program and a list of things to do, it gets done. It's a great organization in terms of delivery, and so we will deliver on that objective as well. But I've also outlined the other suggestions of tasks for the next year, and we'll be putting that together for your review as a work program. So again, we are a continuous improvement organization. We pride ourselves on that, and that includes the general manager. So thank you very much for your comments in that regard.
Good. All right. All right, are we ready to move on then to General Manager report? Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, let me just sort of respond to a couple of the comments that were in the public forum. One is regarding Mr. Walker's comments on the mall. We will take that up and raise that as an issue. When we actually designed the mall, there was a great focus on how to coordinate lift service and deliveries and pickups, and that's drop-offs and pick-ups, with the more complicated maneuvering as we added light rail vehicles to 5th and 6th. What I have a feeling is that we've perhaps forgotten a little bit about what we had decided early on, and that we need to refresh that, make sure that our designation of lift pickup, drop-off spots are properly identified, well-known, and that probably means a better job of our operators communicating with our customers regarding those locations. So we will work on that, and that is important. I appreciate Chris bringing that up. Regarding the boundaries, the lift boundaries, recall that we are on a service improvement program, and as we add new routes, we add lift territory at the same time. So the current policy is to follow the current fixed route boundaries, and so as we add routes, we'll add territory to the lift boundary. Right now, we don't have a policy review scheduled to change that, but that policy will add territory to the lift boundary over time. We do have on the agenda for this next year what we call a lift strategic plan, and that may be an opportunity to also look at ways of, our goal is to try to find ways to really, frankly, reduce the cost per ride of a lift system so that we can enhance and improve the services to all of our customers of that service. And so we'll be looking at ways to do that, and we'll be obviously briefing you on that in the future as well. That work is really just beginning and just underway, so not much new to report there. Regarding Mr. Norton's comments on the fare evasion / citation system, as you will know and as you noted, we have that under substantial review. I'll ask staff to connect with Mr. Norton. That I know that he has communicated with staff in the past on this issue that dates back to 2014, 2015, as he noted. But again, our objective is to really have an even-handed, fair enforcement system. Again, you'll be seeing in the not too distant future, I believe it's either December or January, we're scheduled to bring the revised fare ordinance to you that would deal with the implementation of the new state law. That will be preceded by some advisory committee work. And actually, Board Member Bauman has volunteered to participate in that with us, so you'll be well represented there. With that, perhaps let me move on, unless there are questions about any of those topics. Move on to the topic of ridership, which Mr. Fontes brought up. Again, a very full report that you'll see every statistical evaluation we could possibly perform, we've done, and I think there are some really interesting results out of it that you'll see during the briefing today. Mr. Bottomley will bring that to you. Regarding last month, we had 8.3 million boardings. Overall, though, that ridership was down about 2%. There are a lot of one-off occurrences during August that may account for that, but I think the longer-term trends are also of great interest, which we'll get into with the briefing. Last month, we did have a lot of hot weather that kept people at home. We also had a lot of times when our trains were slowed down, so our on-time performance was affected because of the heat. We also had, I remember, our network outage, so we had those issues. So we had a lot of one-off issues that I think can also help explain some of that. The interesting thing about it, though, is when you look at it, MAX was actually dropped less than 1% with all of that occurring. That was during the weekday. Weekend was down a little bit more, 5.7%. The bright spot in all of that was or I should say the orange spot in all of that was the orange line, which actually saw weekday ridership increases of about 6%, and nearly 3% growth on weekends. So again, that was encouraging to see. Bus was down more, 2.7% weekday, and weekend ridership was down 1.5%. West was also down. We noticed that there were a number of layoffs at some of the businesses along the West Line that did have a direct effect on the ridership. That was particularly at a Microsoft, I believe it was a call facility that was affected. So we're looking internally, how do we gear up the marketing effort for West to begin to replace those riders that were lost in that. Any questions on that? Again, we'll go into the longer term trends in great detail at the briefing.
The only comment I would make, I was at the same conference that Joe was at, and around the United States, all transit agencies are experiencing a decline in ridership.
Yes.
And I maintain it has nothing to do with gas or Uber or Lyft, and I think that there are some other factors sociologically that are changing that would suggest that maybe it's time for us to look at other ways of supporting the region with transit. I think some of the casual riders, everyone is experiencing that, and I think there are some technological changes that are with stores closing and things like that that are really affecting ridership, that they aren't going to come back.
Right.
So, and I know we'll have a full report at the end.
I think when you don't mean to steal Bernie's thunder.
His thunder, yeah.
But I think he'll definitely demonstrate that it's really probably not those traditional drivers that
It is
affecting
not,
this.
no.
That it may be demographics and sort of again buying and
changes
shopping habits, yeah.
in terms of economic forces and things, and the fact that it's not just happening in Portland.
Right. Matter of fact, I would just note that from what I hear, we should feel fairly fortunate at,
We should feel lucky,
1 or
yeah.
2% down.
Yeah.
Wanted to continue, if I could, with the
Please.
rail safety audit. I've asked Doug to come up and give you an update on where we are. Again, I think some.
Did you want to let the auditor come in first? Or you?
Second.
Second,
We're gonna
okay,
do that.
second.
Sorry, I think I had, yeah.
Okay.
And some very encouraging trends on our work on that rail safety audit. And again, thanks to Doug, Patrick Pricer, and the whole transportation team for great work on this.
Morning.
Morning.
Just wait for the PowerPoint to come up here, and that's okay. Great, thank you so much, Mitesh. So good morning. Yes, just to cover off the continuing the updates that we've been providing to you since we really launched this almost a year ago at this time. So you've got a few charts in front of you, and the first chart to look at was actually how did we take this on from the audit when we brought the retired National Transportation inspector in to give us an independent viewpoint here. So if you look at the chart, looking at this on a violations per million miles, we started about not quite a year ago here now, with, as you can see in the chart, around 320 incidents per million miles. Very high by industry standards. But as you can see, we've reduced it so far. The trend is, there's going to be ups and downs in here, but the trend overall is a significant reduction of about 289%. So we are very much on our way. We have a long way to go, so this is not the end of the journey. This is just a milepost in that journey. And so part of this, at the root of it, is culture. It's attention to detail, it's culture, it's setting that new bar, a reasonable bar, where we really should be to run this railway properly. So, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Doug, could you tell us what rule violations are for the
Oh, sure, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah,
for
great
our
question.
listening audience?
Yeah, thank you. So part of the rule violations are for our operators out there. It's about our compliance, in essence, following the rules of the railway. And some of those are human. We have, with the Orange Line, for example, we had some signals installed where probably needed adjustment in there, or overly sensitive, as an example. So not necessarily an operator's issue. These are where we have maybe door violations, and I'll show you a chart or two on that, where somebody maybe opened a door, they drove the train, an operator drove the train beyond the station, or they opened the doors on the other side unintentionally. So where we have rules and regulations, it shows compliance around, are we actually, to the degree that we're actually adhering to those. So there's a variation of what those can actually be.
Thank you.
So, and I'll review some of the examples with you actually in some of the subsequent charts. So you can see overall, pretty good progress. But again, a big caveat, we have a long way to go, and it's one of those types of topics, it never ends. So if we break it down a little bit further, as an example, so within overall rule violations, you would have signal violations. So for example, would an operator pass through a signal So on our tracks, you have signals and you need permission to move into that next section. It's called, the railway, it's called a fixed block system. So you need permission till the last train leaves that section. They own that block. Once the train leaves, the signal gets returned, and then the next train coming through can actually request the signal. The signal would trip, as an example, if they went through the signal. That's not to say there's a safety issue. There's a lot of extra width built into these blocks. The other train may have left at the far end of the block. The other train hasn't even, it may have entered it just early. So here's an example where we've had some operators who've gone through signals. Again, not a safety risk issue, but the fact that it did cross the line. We had some false trips as well, where again these signals maybe were oversensitized, particularly on the orange line, which is not uncommon for new systems until you cut your teeth on them and make the adjustments. So overall, this one's down also by 236%. So quite significant as we start to say, how do we take this on to look at being compliant as a railway? And then also that our operators can trust the signals when they trip. So they don't go, gee, these are false trips, so why should I carry, et cetera. So they do care. We have to make sure we do our part to make sure that they're running on a strong system. Next one up is the speed violations. So this is where someone, say the speed, we have sensors by the trackside bed, that if the speed limit is 40, are they going 45, are they going 35, or something under the speed limit? So it will trip and send a signal to our control center if in fact that speed violation has been surpassed. So you can see here, this one is down by over 300% in terms of where we were. And so you start to see the picture of when you start peeling back signals, you start looking at speed, you start looking at the overall cumulative effect of running a complex railway and how important it is that details really matter here. And these aren't necessarily rules that we necessarily created. These are standard railway operating type of structure rules that the industry generally follows. The next one is, an interesting one, is door rule violations. An example I think I gave you earlier where somebody maybe opened the door on their opposite side unintentionally, or they opened the door where the door was extending a bit beyond the platform where the train was to stop. They maybe went a little too far. So examples like that would be captured in charts like this. So you can see some variation here, but when you look at the month of August, in fact, 0. So we've come a long way, and we have still ways to go. The key is, it's going to be important, is the consistency over time. Train orders. So what train orders are these would be a bulletin that's actually issued every morning. It's a requirement for every operator before they get in the cab of that train. We issue a list of the orders of the day, if you will. So it could include construction zones. Don't forget to look about, not unlike a street where at this intersection you need to slow down, and here's the requirements. So each operator is required to review and sign off every morning for every shift as to what they're going to encounter out there, at least in the known environment. Very common practice in the railway industry. So you can see where we started. We're down the point to point is over 400% down. We've had some progress. We were down, but then we're moving up. You can see some variation here. So we have work to do still in this area. And part of this is we have a lot of new operators out there. And this is where Anthony Forrester from the ATU had talked about before. So we need to help support them, and we are. We have 3 incremental trainers plan to get out there with our operators. 2 of them are in here now, and we got the 3rd one. We're still in the process of getting that 3rd one out as well, to spend more time with our new operators to help them be successful out there, and also holding the standard up to, frankly, where it should be. The cumulative effect, 2 more charts here. The cumulative effect, when you look at year over year, in the blue, that's sort of comparing last year, 15-16 over, and 16 and 17. What I particularly notice, if you can start to look at some of the charts here where you can see the blue and the orange where we're still surpassing this year over the previous year, and then it starts to switch. And you can start to see the impact of comparing year over year and our actual focus of basically trying to move us to the direction where I think we're headed. The last chart I'm going to show you, to me, is actually one I've been wanting to put together for a while, but we haven't had some of the data. You have to bear with me for a sec. It's a bit busy, so I'll just walk you through it. This is a correlation that sometimes we hear out there. Gee, I'm being asked to be on time and not safe. So this is a chart that I'll call the scissor chart. It's not a technical term, I just made that up. That really, when you look at the number of violations, as you saw, tracked in the linear black line, so that's representing of all the ups and downs as you saw from the first chart up. That's looking at the violations trending down. Now you overlay over the same period of time, how is on-time performance doing? So in fact, our on-time performance has increased, while in fact our safety has in fact significantly improved. So you can be on time and you can be safe. The goal is to make those scissors at the back end as wide as possible. So getting to our business plan of 90%, that target for rail, still we've got to drive down that black linear line far further. So I would put to you that in fact you can be safe and you can be on time. And in fact, they're interdependent, because every time someone moves through a signal maybe they shouldn't have, or they've had something trip, someone may have to come out and investigate. Keep the train where it is till someone has to sign off, reset the signal, back the train up. So there is an overlap of that. They're not independent. I would suggest they're very interdependent, that you can be safe and on time at the same time. That would conclude my report.
Good report. Questions by the board? Comments?
That's really impressive. So thank you and Anthony and other input and the safety team for that. I know about the pressure about be safe, but we want the job done, so go step at the top of that ladder. But that was the old days, I hope. So thank you for your work. This is, if there's anything the board can do, let us know.
No, I think you're providing the environment for us to do this,
You know.
and thanks to the general manager as well. And I think you both raised important points. This is not about me. This is actually about our whole village, who takes every
Yep.
day, from the operators to our maintenance of way team to the vehicle mechanics, all the way through. It takes everybody to do their part, and I think part is just then getting out of their way, and they will be successful. And I think they're starting to show that. So thanks for your support.
Yeah, you bet.
Excellent. Yeah, this just, by the way, just identifying the issues and measuring them. It's a good example of measuring and documenting, and then starting to look at the data. What it means is, gives us some great improvements. So, way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. Again, my congratulations to Doug and the whole transportation team again. This is, and thank you very much for your support for some of the budget amendments that we went through over the last year that actually helped us improve, for example, some of the training resources and other things associated with getting those work done. So work in progress, but good results so far. At this point in time, I'd like to bring up our independent auditors from Moss Adams. As you heard from Director Prosser, did do a report to the Finance and Audit Committee earlier this morning. The report was good. So if I could introduce Jim Lanzarota and Keith Simovic from Moss Adams. And I think they're going to give you quick highlights and opportunity for you to ask any questions about the substantial work that they did over the last few months together with our great finance team.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come before you and continue what appears to be some pretty good reports that you've had. Congratulations on a good performance evaluation, sounds like. So we're here to just kind of finalize the process of performing the audit for TriMet. It's that communication piece with the board. So we appreciate that opportunity. I'm Jim Lanzarota, partner with Moss Adams, and I'm here with Keith Simovic, senior manager who was responsible to work with your staff and also supervise our crew in the field in performing the audit. The audit's kind of broken down into, maybe we could think of it in 4 phases. So you have a pretty good understanding, I think, of an audit process. Your staff puts together the annual financial statement. So this is kind of the financial result of all the activities and transactions that you entered into for the year, and then the balances as of your fiscal year end, June 30. And it also has other required information of generally accepted accounting principles. So your crew puts that together. We audit it and put an opinion on there about the degree of accuracy of that information. But a second part of that is we're responsible to look at the internal controls. What are those checks and balances that management uses to make sure that they can capture accurate information and put it together in this annual financial statement properly? And we have an obligation to tell you if there are weaknesses in those internal controls. And you know, I was looking at your acronyms. You've got some pretty sophisticated acronyms here, MPAC and TIAC and CAT. Our acronyms, GAS and GAGAS. I think we could learn from you on perhaps improving our acronyms a little bit, but we have to follow generally accepted auditing standards. That's what results in that opinion on your financials. But you have also your governmental entity that receives federal assistance. So that requires that we follow government audit standards as well. So there's some additional testing for things like fraud, waste, and abuse. And so we look for evidences of that, and we'll talk about it. So a couple elements. A third element is compliance. So since you do get federal grants, we're required to do some additional procedures that test whether you in fact are complying with the requirements of those federal grants. You're also an Oregon Municipal Corporation and a number of state laws that you're required to follow. And we're asked to test about 7 or 8 of those. Things like local budget law, how you administer the budget, public procurements, whether you're doing that process according to state law and your own policies on procurement, those sorts of things. So a compliance audit element is a third part. And then the fourth is the communication. So that's a process we're doing. I'm happy to report that you have a pretty active finance and audit committee. So we had an opportunity to meet early on in our audit process and talk about the audit and where you had concerns, where we were going to place our focus and get some feedback. And I think were there 3 members of the board that attended the planning. So you've got really good participation from your board, which is awesome, and very engaged. I would tell you that the meeting we had on the front end was really fun for us. You've got a very engaged finance and audit committee, so that really helps us to inform us where we should be focusing in the audit, and obviously makes those meetings pretty fun for us as well. So appreciate the level of engagement. So communication is a critical part of the audit. All right, so we did all this work. What did we find? So this is the good news. So in our audit, or our opinion on the fairness of these financial statements, the technical term is we provided an unmodified opinion. In layman's terms, we like to call it a clean opinion. So good job. So basically, based on our work, we're able to determine that this financial statement is a fair representation of the activities and transactions that TriMet entered into during the year, as well as accuracy to the ending balances as of June 30. So a really good job. I know you had some turnover in your accounting staff, so you've got some new faces there, and they did a really good job. I hope you'll get an opportunity to share our appreciation with them and perhaps yours. And under Neil's leadership and Dee's leadership, provided an environment for them to succeed in their first year of putting this annual financial together and facilitating our audit. So clean opinion on the financials, and also in that there were no internal control weaknesses that we're required to report to you. So the checks and balances that your team uses to put together accurate financials, those were all good, and no particular weaknesses that were required to bring to your attention. The single audit, or the audit of your federal grants, again, the compliance elements that were required to test, that produced no findings. So you have done a very good job in administering your grants. And I know you've got a number of people responsible to help you comply with those particular requirements, and they've done a really good job in that regard. On our testing of your the specific Oregon laws, again, no findings of non-compliance. And that's also phenomenal. You're probably aware with government agencies, one of the common types of findings are just over expenditures against budgets. So you put that together at a line item or more detail to it, and it's common to have over expenditures. We didn't even find an over expenditure against the budget. So good job there. We did test some compliance against some revenue bond covenants, and again, no particular findings there. Now, we are required to do some communications, and we're not going to go over this in detail. We had a chance to do that with your Audit and Finance Committee here just a little while ago this morning. But there's a couple things on there I think as a board you like to hear about. One is, gosh, did we have any audit adjustments? So we found an error that required management to post a correction, and we're happy to report there were no audit adjustments. So basically, we were presented with clean numbers, and we didn't find any errors. We also find that boards like to know, gosh, were we asking questions of management and it felt like they were being evasive, or they weren't providing information to us, or somehow just being a little bit coy in the process. And we're happy to report to you that we didn't experience anything like that. So your crew is very helpful to the audit, very timely in providing information to us, and no particular problems. Sometimes there's disagreements over how to apply an accounting standard or a treatment to something, and we didn't have any particular disagreements. We had some good spirited discussions, but no disagreements. So those are probably the kinds of things. We went into more detail a while ago, but those are probably the things that you might be interested in hearing about. So really, that's trying to be brief here. We gave a more thorough report to your finance and audit, but good news, very good job in putting these financials together and in following the appropriate internal control that you had implemented, and the things that you do to help you comply with your federal grants and state laws. I'd certainly entertain any questions that you may have.
Or comments? Did you have something?
No, thank you. Thank you. This is good news, more good news. But who wants the hard questions? No, I'm just teasing you. Kind of question for you and for Neil, sort of. Does this go into the Secretary of State's audit too?
No,
Which you may or may not know about. It was a couple years ago.
Yeah, that was a generally performance audit.
Okay.
And at the time, Moss Adams was involved with us at the time that was done, but really kind of separate topics in many ways, yeah.
But there is a requirement for the audit to go to the Secretary of State Audits Division. So every Oregon municipal corporation files financial statements with the Secretary of State. If they're audited, you file the audit report, and those are due by December 31st. So I don't believe you've sent it off yet. This is still hot off the press this week, but you'll have an obligation to send this to the Secretary of State by the end of the year.
Okay, and if there's any questions, they come back to you guys first, your firm first?
Yeah, and so what happens is generally if there's two types of responses that the state generally provides after they receive the report. If we have findings, so if there are non-compliance with state laws, they're going to ask that the board and management take corrective actions. And they want to, so they've upped their game in terms of the formality of that. And so they want to know, what are your corrective action plans? Since we don't have any findings, I'm not, obviously they have nothing to ask for there.
Which might raise a flag with them.
Exactly. The second thing that tends to happen is they do a number of reviews, and they do different levels. They'll do a desk review, and so they may pick TriMet in their sampling. So there's, 15 or 1,600 governmental entities that file financial statements with the state, and they'll pick about maybe 120 a year, and they'll do a desk review. And if they find something they don't like in the financials, either something we didn't catch or something with our report, they may issue a letter. And that will go to the auditor. It would also go to management. And we've received a number of these letters. Sometimes it's just to say we did a desk review and nice job. No particular issues. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things the state would send out after receipt of your report.
That's okay. Good. This is.
And if I might just add to that, even auditors have audits. And I would just note over the last year that the federal government did audit Moss Adams policies and procedures associated with the TriMet audit, and found that in good stead as
Okay.
well. So just to note that that level of review occurs at
Yeah.
many levels.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead.
I'll try to do this. First, thank you for your work and the help in working with our staff and make sure that we comply with all the necessary standards. What I'd really like to do is acknowledge Dee and Kara and Eric for their hard work on this. And Kara and Eric were new to TriMet this year, and so to come into an organization and learn all that goes on while an audit's going on is a big job, and they passed with flying colors. So thank you very much.
And I just conclude by saying, I think your audit is confirmed what the board knows, is we do a wonderful job of managing our resources and funds. And I think the public should feel very good about the results of this audit. And frankly, there's other things you talked to us about in terms of how we're actually attacking our pension, liabilities and things. So, this is just, again, should help people feel good about what TriMet is doing in terms of shepherding and guiding the resources that we have. I assume that this will also now be part of our ongoing transparency accountability webpage, that people can pick it up and read it. And I would encourage anybody who is interested in this kind of thing to get onto our website and take a look at this.
Yeah.
Isn't the most popular reading, but it's reading that's necessary and people should understand. So I want to thank you guys for your effort. And I also want to thank the staff, as Director Prosser pointed out. This is a great outcome, and it makes me feel a lot better being the chair of this board when I see those kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right.
And Mr. Board President, that concludes my report.
All right, I like that. All right then, are we ready to move on to the consent agenda? All right. So on the consent agenda, there's 3 items here today, and for everybody watching, the items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and may be approved by the board in a single blanket motion. However, any board member can remove an item from the consent agenda for discussion or questions by requesting such action prior to consideration of this portion of the agenda. And I'd point out the 3 items got approval of our board meeting minutes of August 9th, 2017. Got resolution 17-09-66, which is authorizing the contract with Davis, Hibbets, and Midjol, I never can pronounce their name. Migdal, right? Right. For market research services. And then the final one is resolution 17-09-67, which is authorizing a fund exchange with Metro for transit-oriented development funding coordination. So with that, is there any item on the consent agenda a member of the board would like to have removed?
Nope.
Then is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as
So
presented?
moved.
Have a motion?
Second.
I have a second. I think it was over.
Thumbs up, Kenny.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion then to approve the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to the one other remaining item we have on our formal agenda, which is resolution 17-09-68, which is authorizing a contract with Railworks Track Systems, Inc. for construction services for the West Side Express Service Commuter Rail Right-of-Way Maintenance Project. Mr. General Manager.
Yeah, Mr. Board President, members of the board, I was hoping Steve Witter could come forward to answer any questions and keep me on track on this one. This is an interesting contract, but as you well know, the West is an operation that runs on a private railroad, Portland and Western. Again, we have a shared use agreement with Portland and Western that really governs that use of the right-of-way. Under that shared use agreement, generally Portland and Western does the maintenance work on the right-of-way because they use it for the freight trains as well as the passenger service that they run for us on weekdays. In addition to that, we can, if there is extraordinary need for maintenance, contract ourselves for additional maintenance. And obviously, we do that in conjunction and in collaboration with Portland and Western, i.e. working with them about the kinds of services they want to provide or feel capable of providing, those that step outside of their normal capability. So in that regard, we identified a package of work related to the WES alignment and developed the specs together in collaboration with Portland Western. And the specs are really designed to both maintain the track structure in a way that allows the speeds that we do achieve, and that's really meeting a federal standard, an FRA standard, as well as the work that's necessary to really maintain compliance with the positive train control system that we also have been implementing and strengthening over the last few years. So with that package of improvements, there was a request for bids, again, low bid process, and we received 2 bids, one from Railworks, the other from Stacy and Whitbeck. As the board report notes, these both came in over our original estimate. And we then decided to begin to negotiate with Railworks to see if we could get a better idea about why there was a discrepancy between their price and the estimate. It's interesting to note that both of the bidders were very close in terms of the pricing. So it indicated to us there was probably something wrong with the estimate and with our independent estimate. And I think there are a number of items that are listed in your staff report. One key one is that because of our schedules, much of this work had to be done on off shifts, so it's really overtime work. And so there's premiums associated with doing that we perhaps were not as sensitive to in our estimate as we should have. We also discussed some of the diversity issues with these, again, the use of DBEs. Nearly all of this work is done by the single contractor. And so there's very little opportunity in the scope of work to actually subcontract the work. As we reviewed this, we came to the conclusion that the Railworks bid was a good, solid price, and that we should proceed perhaps with it. And with that, I'd ask Steve or Paige Schlepp, who's here with us as the project manager, to offer any additional comments on this that you might have.
Well, excuse me, first off, President Warner, members of the board, I'd just like to introduce Paige Sloop, who's a manager in our Stations and Guideways group, and introduce you to her today. She will be the lead manager with staff under her actually executing this work. So, Paige, good morning. As Neil indicated, this bid was sort of out of the range of our independent cost estimate. We did, in fact, go back to the contractor sort of in 2 veins. One, to understand the discrepancies between the way we had seen the work and the way they had seen the work. As Neil indicated, it's really work that we want to do starting, excuse me, end of service Friday night and complete before service on Monday morning. So the ability to get that work done under regular hours was not there. In our negotiations with the contractor, we even explored the idea of providing additional work windows. And so closing down WES service on the rails Thursdays and Fridays to give them a longer work window. When we analyzed what the operational cost responsibilities back to us were for bus bridges, inconvenience to our customers, and also one other thing I want to note in a moment, was that we really only received a 10% savings based on that. We would have inconvenienced our customers, and TriMet would have borne some risk on our side that currently is in the contractor's scope. That was the thing I wanted to touch on just for a minute. Part of this work is actually undercutting the track bed, and so in that bed are buried cables that contain the signals and communications work that's critical to the safe operations of WES, as well as Portland and Western, under a franchise agreement, has fiber optic cable in that area. What this contractor was going to provide was some specialized personnel to make sure that those cables were protected during construction. That actually was a significant part of their bid, and one that we said maybe we could take on that risk. After we analyzed that, we felt that the risk was way too high, especially when it comes to the fiber optic cable under franchise. And so for 10% savings, we decided that we would enter into contract under this price with your approval, of course, and certainly not inconvenience our customers with workarounds and things like that. So I just wanted to note that. I want to thank Paige and her team, especially Josh Brennan, who did a lot of the negotiations and understanding. So with that, I'd be happy to address any other questions.
Question, yes, Joe?
Are we gonna have staff out there? Somebody,
Absolutely.
eyes on the,
Yep.
okay. Yeah. Now, do you know if that's all that's underneath there?
You never know.
That's my question. So.
Yes, but I will note that we got tangled up in a fiber optic cable when we built this back in 2007, 2008,
Yeah.
and it was an extremely big deal. Telephone customers, I think there may be other sensitive customers like the federal government and things like
Yeah.
that. So it's tricky.
Yeah.
That's, you might want to make a note of that for the future on your, on your prints. For, you know, we found an extra one. That's all.
And that'll certainly be part of the process. When we're
Yeah.
done, there's always an as-built.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
That's built. Okay.
thank you.
Have we used RailWorks before?
We've not used RailWorks
Okay.
before, to my knowledge.
Yeah, our team did a lot of outreach to try to bring in and diversify our pool of contractors that we work with. And I think this is a successful example of trying a new contractor and trying new teams. We have confidence in them.
Yeah. That's good.
So-
Go ahead.
So they have a long history of this?
Well, they're a professional rail contractor. I
Yeah,
think they're
so
known.
around the country?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Portland Western was certainly familiar with them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess my comment is, that's good. I mean, they're new. This is an opportunity to, I guess, educate them in our desires to encourage use of DBEs and women and minorities in the workforce. And I don't know whether you're planning on tracking any of that information, but that would be great to see that and set the expectations right up front for these guys, that these are the kind of things we hope they can do.
We'll continue to reinforce that with them, and we will track that
Okay, good.
through our certified payroll process.
Good.
So, yeah.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions by the board? Then are we ready to make a motion to?
Yeah, just an aside, I just learned at the conference we went to how much fun it is to build over a rail yard. Talk about windows,
Yeah.
putting the columns between the tracks. So that's your next project.
Well, it actually sounds like some of the work we're doing at Ruby Junction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
No-
then,
no questions.
is the board comfortable when somebody make a motion to approve resolution 17-09-68? I have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. Is there a further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve resolution 17-09-68, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
look forward to hearing how these guys do.
Me too.
Mr. General Manager, Board, that appears to be the last action item on our agenda. Is there anything else that needs to come before the board this morning?
No, we'll look forward to the briefing next.
All right, then I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Oh, I was just going to add a piece of information. I did have a chance to talk to the Siemens people at the at the conference about the electric buses and the chargers, and if there's any special training that needs to be done, holler. So
Okay.
for the installation,
Appreciate that.
you know, the crane, the neck.
Yeah, I call it the claw. But
That's the official.
just to note, and maybe just on that point, we actually this afternoon will be having a kickoff on our electric bus project with New Flyer, with Siemens, with Portland General Electric, our staff as well. So Again, our goal is to have those buses in operation generally around this time next year. We've picked the Route 62 in Washington County from Washington Square to Beaver Transit Center that will host those buses from 5 a.m. in the morning to 11 p.m. at night. So we'll give them a good workout. But again, we're getting into the real detail of that at a work session this afternoon, and that will be the big kickoff for that project.
Good, good. Okay.
One thing that we also heard, because Denver has a significant number of electric buses, is that they actually had to add sound to them
Yeah,
because they're so quiet
yeah,
and people didn't know they were coming.
yeah. I think that was particularly true on the 16th Street Mall, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Nope. All right.
That's it.
All right, with that, I will adjourn the meeting. How's the board doing? Do we need to take a quick break before we get into the
Yeah.
briefings? Okay. How about 7 minutes?
Yep.
I forgot my watch.
think Joe went. Maybe you'll hear us and come back around the corner. Mr. Bottomley, are you ready to roll?
Yes, I am, Mr. President. Board President Warner and members of the board, Bernie Bottomley, and with me here is Tom Mills from our Planning and Policy Group, who did a lot of the work on this analysis and led the team, the internal team that produced the materials. So what I want to do is go through. I'm having trouble with the.
It's changing over here. Yeah.
It's changing on
It's
the computer
advancing on
apparently,
this,
but it's
but not on the screen.
not showing up on the screen. So what I want to do is walk you through an analysis that we've been working on for quite a while. And, okay, perfect. And it spans the period from 2001 to 2016. We sort of picked that period because we've got good data for that span. And there aren't as many sort of internal changes as how we count ridership and things like that in that period. So you can compare more apples to apples. As you'll see as I go through this, I've added trend lines because the data month to month, year to year tends to bump up and down based on whether we had a really bad winter that year or a really hot summer, which the general manager mentioned. And the trend lines sort of take out some of the noise and give you the long-term trends. But if you want to hone in on any specific year, let me know and we can go into that. So the major findings are during that period of 2001 to 16 overall ridership, which is all of our fixed route. And just to be clear, I'm leaving out sort of the Lyft program from this analysis. It's about our fixed route system. Overall ridership is relatively flat, but when you break out max and bus, you start to see some distinction there. Max ridership has been up in the peak. Grew substantially over time, and I'll show you that, but has flattened here in the last couple of years. Bus ridership for both the peak and the off-peak has been down at a fairly steady but small incremental decline between 2001 and 16. There's, as Director Simmons mentioned, there's no single factor that you can point to in sort of doing a multivariate regression analysis and say, okay, it's that. It's combinations of factors, some of which have more influence, some of which have less, and I'll kind of go through that. And then at the very end, talk briefly about some strategies that we are developing to respond to the impacts over time and try to reverse the trend. So as I mentioned, total ridership has actually increased dramatically from 2001 to the end of 2016. But most of that growth occurred between 2001 and 2009. Most of that growth was on the light rail system, which is in the green here. And as you can see, bus under that in the red, or above that in the red, shows kind of a fairly steady erosion over time, more pronounced in recent years than historically. But we really notice that I start the graph here at 300,000. So we're not talking about huge erosion in the system. We're still providing 100 million rides a year. And that's up substantially from the 82 million that we moved in 2001. So we're really talking about changes around the margin, but nevertheless long-term trends that we want to be paying attention to. So breaking apart Max and Bus here for a little bit, you can see that the overall Max ridership has been increasing over time. Obviously, we've been adding additional lines over that period. But you see the peak ridership increasing at a fairly steady clip during this whole 2001 to 2016 period. The off-peak ridership on Max growing steeply from 2001 to around 2012, beginning of 2012, and the same for weekends. But the interesting thing here is that after, the end of 2011, beginning of 2012, those off-peak and weekend trips on Max have flattened a little bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. On Bus, the trend is a little different. These are, in green here, are the bus peaks. So these are the commute hours. And we've seen a steady decline in that over time. We've also seen a fairly steady decline in off-peak. But you see here in the more recent years, since 2015, a steeper decline in those off-peak and weekend trips. So the conclusion here is that Max has been growing to steady. Bus is where we see the declines, and so that's what I'm going to focus on for the majority of the presentation. Oh dear. So we've got some graphic problems here. So we looked at the components of bus ridership decline. So this was just taking the declines and looking at those, not looking at the additions, the growth in ridership. And there are lines that have grown, but just where the declines have happened. And what, if the numbers were in the right places, this is peak. So about 25% of the, or 20% rather, of the decline has occurred in the peak periods, and about the rest of it is evenly divided between off-peak and weekend. So about 40% of the losses happened in the off-peak, and 40% have happened on weekends. And Dr. Simmons stole a little bit of my thunder, but she was right on when she said that there are some demographic changes that are causing those factors. And I'll get to that a little bit later on. So the first question when you think about ridership is what influences ridership? What are the historical correlates to ridership that you would want to look at? Gas prices, employment levels, what are the fares that are being charged? Other questions such as operational factors like service hours, on-time performance, how the travel time on a particular route changes over time. And then other modes like biking, walking, and here more recently products like Lyft and Uber. And then finally demographics such as housing and employment trends. So I'm going to focus for a little bit on some of these at the top that we looked at, but they don't have huge influence. But I just want to kind of go through those quickly because those are the things that people normally look at and say, well, it must be, employment levels or gas prices. And I just want to just quickly kind of note that those aren't really the big drivers, at least for these long-term trends. So the red line here is gas prices, and the blue line here is ridership. And as you can see, we had a pretty substantial historic long-term trend increase in gas prices until about 2013, and then they declined. And you just don't see a corresponding change in the ridership pattern. You do see here where gas prices spiked in 2008, you do see a ridership spike as well. So there is a short-term influence at play, but the long-term trends are really not closely aligned with gas prices. This looks at unemployment levels. You could look at total employment as another measure, but we looked at unemployment levels. And so the red line here is unemployment, which is on this axis over here. And this is the top of the recession where we had unemployment close to 11%. And you do see some correlation between ridership as unemployment goes down here. You see a little bit of an increase in ridership. So you figure there are more people commuting to work for their jobs, and that's going to increase your ridership. And you see that a little bit here as unemployment comes down, our ridership starts to come up. You certainly see the beginning of the recession here where unemployment rose steeply in 2008 and our ridership declined steeply in 2008, 2009. So you definitely see it on the downward trend. The interesting thing here is as unemployment has declined to very low levels, we don't see a corresponding increase in bus ridership that you would expect as commute trips are increasing. Bus hours of service are another indicator typically that you would look at, and there's definitely some correlation, but it's not a super strong one, particularly in the more recent years. So the orange line here are hours of service, and the blue line is ridership. What's interesting about this is in late 2009, September 2009, we cut ridership. And again, this graph overstates the impact, but for purposes of kind of zooming in on the impact, we had a fairly substantial decrease in service hours. What's interesting is that actually the ridership started to decline just before the service hour changes were made. So we were already seeing the impact of the recession on ridership before we trimmed hours. Now it's probable that we had this lower level of service between 2010 and end of 2013. That probably kept bus ridership lower than it would have been otherwise if we'd been adding that service back. But again, like the last graph on unemployment, you see service hours climbing here, and we don't see the corresponding increase in ridership that you would expect. Now, some of this will come in later when we talk about on-peak and off-peak ridership. These hours here that we were adding back, where we did get a little bit of an increase in ridership, those were adding back frequent service lines. These hours out here are adding back off-peak and weekend service. So we added back the most critical, highest use hours here, and we're adding back less productive hours, but things that we still want to be able to provide the community. Fares are another issue that we typically hear about as a potential influence on ridership. This orange line is fares. And the blue here is bus weekly ridership, and the green is max. And what you see here is a steady, we had a policy of fairly steady increases in fares up until late 2008. And you don't see a corresponding decline in weekly bus ridership. And in fact, you see an increase in max ridership. So this level of periodic increase in fares clearly isn't depressing ridership. People are not responding to that and saying, I can't afford it and I can't ride. We did have a substantial fare increase, 25% or 25 cents in 2008 at the beginning of the recession. And you can see, if I can steady my hand here, a decline in ridership that came right after that on the bus side. It doesn't appear that that has a long-term effect. As the fare changes kept occurring over time, and you didn't have that level of response from bus ridership. But I think it's fair to say that when you have a spike or a shock to the system of that magnitude, that it will have an impact on ridership, at least for the short term. Similar to the gas prices. If you see a big change in a short period of time, you will see some response. How enduring it is over time, I think that's debatable. So some of the other changes that we've made over the years that folks have pointed to that might impact ridership were the elimination of Fairless Square in January of 2010. And it doesn't appear to us that that really had an effect on long-term trends. There's no sort of change in the curve for either bus or max ridership that occurred around the time of the Fairless Square change. And I chose to look here at off-peak ridership because Fairless Square was primarily an off-peak travel benefit, so people traveling during the lunch hour from their office to a restaurant or appointments within downtown. It wasn't primarily a commute benefit where you're going from outside of Fairless Square into Fairless Square, because of course you would have paid for that trip. And the same going out of Fairless Square. So not a substantial change in the long-term trends from Fairless Square. And then in 2012, we ended the free rail zone. And it may be that we got a little dip in off-peak max trips when we ended the free rail zone. But I don't think it had sort of major impacts over the long-term trend in ridership. But I think, and you'll see this on the streetcar, there are alternatives now in downtown that we didn't have at the beginning of, or at the end of the free rail zone that are also having an effect on rail ridership, particularly in downtown. So another issue we looked at is on-time performance. And the interesting question that you ask yourself around on-time performance is, how soon does a change in on-time performance impact somebody's riding habits? Is it the first time the bus is late? Is it the third time the bus is late, et cetera? So when I compared these factors in real time, there didn't appear to be a strong correlation. So I gave it a 6-month lag on ridership. So I said changes in on-time performance will affect ridership 6 months later. And you do see some correlation, although actually the changes in bus ridership precede the changes in on-time performance a little bit here. So I think there is a correlation. The question is sort of, there's a different lag time for different people. Their tolerance for changes in on-time performance are different depending on their individual circumstances. The thing that's interesting here is we've made substantial strides, as you've heard from Doug Kelsey. We've made substantial strides in on-time performance. More recently, we haven't seen a corresponding increase in ridership, and it just may be that it takes longer for people to recognize the improvement in on-time performance than it takes for them to recognize the decline in on-time performance, right? So you recognize declines right away. It takes longer to experience and recognize the improvement in the system.
Question?
Sure, and interrupt me at any time. I'm happy to answer questions.
Do you have a ballpark figure of how many more cars or people have come here since 2001?
Since 2001, I would have to get you the number. It's
I know it's going this way.
substantial. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the population and
Congestion.
vehicle growth,
Right.
congestion have all increased substantially since 2001. Yeah.
Just to have some kind of perspective that.
Yeah, we can get you that.
Thanks.
Yep. So another factor is the average speed of a bus route. So if it takes longer to get from point A to point B because of congestion, all other things being equal, it's likely that ridership would be negatively impacted by that. So this looks at a number of our heavy-duty routes that traverse the city, and what you can see is a pretty consistent decline in the average speed of those routes because of increased congestion on the corridor that everyone else is experiencing as well. So there's definitely a slowing of the system that comes into play as we look at ridership. So we tried to create a little bit of a service quality index. It's very non-scientific. It's just grouping together the questions of on-time performance, overcapacity, so crowding on the system, and increase in the travel time for the bus route. And you do see some overlap here. These are the routes that, on a percentage basis, had the biggest impacts on ridership. And you see a lot of these yellow are the biggest factors in terms of bad on-time poor on-time performance, overcrowding, or increased runtime. So clearly, there's a correlation at some level between service quality, that package of factors that we would think of as service quality, and the health of the line.
Bernie?
Yeah.
Have we considered changing what we state as when we will arrive so that we manage people's expectations better?
And we do. We adjust the schedules every year to reflect the reality of the trip. What happens as corridors get more congested is the standard deviation, if you will, from the published table gets greater. The uncertainty about your travel time becomes greater. And that's one of the pernicious problems with congestion is some days it's really bad, some days it's not so bad.
I know, but it'd be great to manage expectations and surprise them. You're early.
Well, you don't want to be early. That's the problem. Because
because the
they're
next
not at
leg
the stop.
won't be.
Well, they're not at the
Early.
stop yet.
Yeah.
Early is worse.
Early is worse than late in our world. So
didn't realize that.
we actually give the operators less latitude to be early than we do for them to be late. Yeah. So so that's the problem with congestion is on-time performance just gets worse in that circumstance. So another factor that typically gets raised is perception of safety. So I've overlaid here our annual attitude and awareness survey results for the perception of safety with ridership, and there's very little correlation here. In fact, you can see where our approval rating on safety went from 65% up to 85% over the 2007 to 2010 period, but ridership in that period declined. So it doesn't mean we're going to stop paying attention to safety and make sure that we're doing our utmost to make sure that the system is safe and secure. But it doesn't appear that the public perception is a major driver of ridership. I mentioned streetcar, and as you know, TriMet has a major role to play in operation of the streetcar. When it started in 2001, it had about 2,100 passengers. Today, on average, weekdays, 14,000 passengers. They've grown the system by about 12,000 average weekday passengers. A lot of the routes in downtown that the streetcar travels, if it weren't for streetcar, there would be a bus there because there's demand for travel in those corridors. So I think it's fair to say that some of this 12,000 would probably be on our bus system, but for the streetcar. However, we don't count the streetcar trips in our reporting to you. So we probably underreport transit ridership because streetcar is not included in our net numbers. Now, it wouldn't account for all of it because we lost 21,000 trips on the bus side over that same period. So, but clearly we've replaced some what would otherwise be bus trips with streetcar trips. Other issues that come up, increasing in bikes, and there's probably some overlap here. Now, you have to be careful here. I've just for purposes of putting these on a graph that you can see at the same time, I've changed the scale on bikes over here. So this is 25,000, this is 135,000 on the bus trip. So very different scales. If I put them on the same scale, the bikes would be down here at this, and you wouldn't even be able to see them. But as bike trips have increased over time, you have seen a corresponding decrease in bus travel. So there's probably some folks who are riding bikes that historically might have ridden the bus system before the city has invested as much as it has in bike paths and protected bikeways and shared facilities. And I'll talk about this just a little bit later. Transit users are also the most likely travelers to embrace other modes of travel besides the single occupant vehicle. People who are in their car are the least likely to try other modes. They're the least likely to try biking or walking or transit. So our customers are typically more open to alternative modes. So TNCs are, Lyft and Uber are TNCs, Transportation Network Companies is what TNC stands for. So there's, an ongoing question about, are they having a major impact on the system? And TNCs in Portland officially launched in mid-2015. And what I've put up here are in blue weekends, in green off-peak, and in red peak bus. And what you see is there's probably not a statistically significant change in peak bus use or ridership after the launch of the TNCs. But you do see a change in weekend and off-peak ridership. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I think one of the things that we think is happening is that some of those off-peak and weekend trips are, TNCs are much more viable for those trips because they're once a week or once every 2 weeks as opposed to every day. If you're a transit rider, you're probably not that likely to take Uber to downtown Portland for your job every single day. You're more likely to use transit for that. So then, another issue, and this now is turning to the question of demographics. And I think this is where you really start to see a stronger correlation between ridership changes and data. This is a map of Portland from 2001 to 2016 and the change in assessed value of homes, residential homes. And where the color is darker, those are major increases in assessed value. Where it's lighter are very small to minimal increases in assessed value. And in this case, the assessed value is a proxy for income. It's a lagging indicator, but it's a fairly good proxy for income. And the reason we use this instead of census tracts where you can get income is we get these nice little quadrangles that we can measure around bus stops more easily than we can census tracts. Well, what you see over that period of time is a significant increase in property values in Southeast and Northeast and North Portland. Dramatic, up to 200% or more over that period. And what you see this is I-205 right here. What you see in East Portland, east of I-205 and in Gresham, is relatively low changes in assessed value. You also see that out in Clackamas County and some areas there. And that corresponds to the demographic changes that we've all heard about over time, that there's been a significant gentrification in this area and a movement of lower income and medium income residents from northeast and southeast Portland to the areas east of 82nd. Now, if you correspond that to ridership changes, what you see is a pretty strong correlation. The rust-colored here is declines in ridership. The blue are increases in ridership. So you see major increases in ridership east of I-84 or of I-205 and out in Washington County where we've added additional service in the suburban areas of Hillsborough and Aloha. It's hard to see on the map, but we've got rail lines on here, and you see the ridership increases along the rail lines, particularly east of 205 along the blue line. So there's a strong correspondence there, and what we did was just overlay those two maps. And what you see is northeast and southeast Portland had the biggest increase in assessed value and the biggest declines in ridership. So what that tells us is our historically strong ridership areas have been impacted by a change in the circumstances, the demographics of the folks who are living there. So the other thing we looked at was the work commute for folks living east of 205. And I tried to get it, I wasn't able to get it from the city of Portland to contrast with the work commute for north and northeast Portland. But what you see here is this circle is an area that the city identified, and they looked at all the people who live within this oval and looked at where they work. And the darker red areas are the locations for their jobs. So this is the Columbia Corridor. Troutdale Industrial Area is out here. This is the Clackamas Industrial Corridor. This is OHSU. What's striking about this graphic is this is downtown Portland. And it shows up here, but it's certainly not a dark red area. So what this tells us is that the folks, at least in the inner part of East Portland, so between I-205 and about 122nd, their commute for work are really not into downtown, where our strongest lines are running east-west here. They're up in the Columbia Corridor, down in Clackamas Industrial Area. So the map I was hoping to get was to show the commute from north and northeast Portland, which I'm willing to bet is mostly into this downtown core. So I think what we're seeing here is two patterns that are converging. One is that our traditionally strong ridership in northeast and southeast Portland, their residential end of the trip is now dispersed and more spread out in East Portland. And their work destination is now more spread out up and down the Columbia Corridor, as opposed to being more concentrated in downtown Portland. And those two patterns converging have led to a significant change in bus ridership. So one of the interesting things that we did was look at, this is from our attitude and awareness survey, was we asked folks in the survey to identify their income levels in tranches, so we're not getting any too specific with the information. So this just compares the 2001-2003 average income levels to the 14-16 average income levels. And what you see here is in 2001-2003, a little over 15% of our ridership had income less than $20,000. That dropped to less than 10% in 14 and 16. On the other end of the spectrum, in 2001-2003, 10% of our ridership was over 100,000. Today, it's over 25%. So that demographic change is showing up in the income levels of our ridership. Now, one thing to note here is this is not adjusted for inflation. So there are just changes in the income levels due to inflation that overstate this a little bit, but nevertheless, I think that the trend is clearly there.
So,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm gonna bite my tongue here. So would this be the result of some zoning changes?
I don't think it's so much zoning as it's just the market-driven change in affordability of housing.
I mean the jobs downtown.
I think the job
more-
market has changed over 20
There's more
years.
condos.
I don't know that it's the housing that shows up in that map. It's just the type of work downtown. There used to be a much broader mix of skill levels represented in the workforce in downtown. And it's, you know, progressed over time to where, you know, to get a job in downtown Portland, you have to have a college degree and, you know, or more. So that's an oversimplification, but I think the trend is pretty clear in that direction.
Thank you.
So the other thing that we looked at was trips into downtown. And what you see is the peaks. So this is 2004, 7, and 16. The peaks have stayed fairly constant. We've had the same sort of ridership in and out of downtown for the peaks since 2004. What's changed is fewer trips in the midday and fewer trips on the weekends. And part of it, I think, is that demographic change. If you're living in East Portland, it just takes longer to get into downtown Portland, so you're not likely to hop the bus to come down for shopping or a doctor's appointment, you know, those kinds of things. And for the weekends, you're not as likely to come into downtown for a movie, restaurant, or other entertainment options if you're farther away. It's just a longer trip. So I'm going to shift now, and I'll come back to some of this a little bit later, but I'm going to shift now to our attitude and awareness surveys. So this is our survey of both riders and non-riders, and I chose to just look at the riders in this case because we're trying to understand who has shifted from frequent ridership to less frequent ridership. And what this graph shows you is that you have folks move in both directions. So we have non-riders who become infrequent riders. We have infrequent riders who become occasional riders, and so forth. We're not losing, when we lose a frequent rider, we're typically not losing them completely. They're not a frequent daily rider one day and the next day they don't ride the system at all. What tends to happen is that a frequent rider becomes a regular rider becomes an occasional rider, and so forth. and that'll show up here in a minute when I talk about the off-peak trends. So our job is to focus on this cohort of folks here. Why are they riding less frequently than they have in the past? And we ask about trip types. And you see fewer recreation trips between 2015 and 2016, more work trips, but these sort of less frequent types of trips, shopping, personal business, visit friends and family, all declining a bit. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And Mr. Fonts pointed out very accurately that we show a decline in go to the airport trips in our attitude and awareness survey, but actually in our ridership survey that doesn't appear that dramatically. So a couple of folks mentioned the national trends. We do see the same kinds of national trends here that we see around the country. We're maybe a little bit behind, so we didn't see some of the same declines as quickly as the rest of the country did, but we clearly follow. So this in blue is TriMet percent change year over year, and in red is the national ridership trend. So clearly nothing unique here. As our economic cycle is a little different than the rest of the country, our trend line has a little bit different timing, but it's overall the same. So conclusions. Light rail is relatively healthy, particularly in the peak commute hours. The bus peak is steady, but declining slightly over time. The real issue is peak and off-peak bus trips. A lot of factors at play, but the demography and geography seem to be the biggest ones. There are certainly important issues around speed, convenience, and reliability that impact people's choices to ride the system, and those are things that we need to address as the transportation system in general is increasingly congested. So I think one of the things, before I go to the strategies that we're really seeing here, is that a lot of the ridership that used to live in inner Portland has moved to outer Portland because of affordability of housing. They're not as able to take the trips to their workplace because both their residence and the trip end, their employment place, are both now more diverse than they used to be. And our system is not as robust in East Portland as it is in inner Portland. And that the same holds true for the suburbs in Washington County, Aloha area, and so forth. It's also true that the road network and the sidewalk network is not as robust in those areas as it is in the inner city. So both the city and the other jurisdictions that we work with are struggling to try to build out the infrastructure in those areas so that we have better streets and more connective sidewalks. And over time, what we're going to need to do is to focus our efforts on building our network and our system in those areas in order to serve those populations. One of the reasons I think the off-peak trips have changed over time is actually, off-peak and weekend, is actually kind of a success story, which is that we've had a very deliberate strategy across the region, but particularly in Portland, of building walkable neighborhoods so that we get people out of their cars and we have fewer vehicle trips in total, not just fewer auto trips, but fewer transit trips and more pedestrian trips, because those are the least impactful to the system of all trips. And it's been a tremendous success, whereas Portland downtown used to be the only place, almost, that you would go for a show, for entertainment, music, nightlife, restaurants, and so forth. You now have dozens of places around the city where you can get world-class meals, great entertainment. They're very vibrant retail spines in Alberta and North Williams and Hawthorne and other areas around the city. Downtown Oregon City is a great, place to go now for to go out for dinner, and that just means fewer off-peak trips on the transit system. Those folks that used to go from the neighborhood I live in, 13th and Klickitat, down to the Safeway store at Lloyd Center, a lot of them now are walking to the New Seasons. That's just a couple blocks away. Folks in East Portland have a much tougher time because they don't have those same walkable neighborhoods. And so their trip, their off-peak trip now is much longer, and it's just a harder trip to navigate from where they are to where they want to go because the system is not as integrated there as it is in the rest of the region. So clearly a lot of work to do in those areas. Strategies for us to look at, and these are things that we've been doing and are continuing to do and will reinforce as we go forward. The first is our service enhancement plan network. For the last couple of years, with the help of Tom and his team, have been looking at how we build the network and the system in places like East Portland and the suburban communities of Washington County. So doing a good job of building that north-south network that connects those neighborhoods to the employment areas in the Columbia Corridor and in the Clackamas Industrial Area are certainly important improvements that need to happen. Improving on-time performance and travel time through a strategy which we call Enhanced Transit, or ETC, you may see that sometime. This is working with the jurisdictions to improve choke points, similar to what we're doing on Division, but at a lower scale, not doing them necessarily on a whole corridor, but looking at a single intersection where we lose a significant amount of time because of congestion, going into that intersection and making some improvements such as smart signals, bus queue jump lanes, or other strategies that can just move that bus through that congestion point a little bit more quickly. So that's an important strategy going forward. Integrating services. So the HOP platform provides us a way to integrate trips that have multiple modes. So at some point, we'd like to get the HOP system set up so that Lyft and Uber and other TNCs, bike share, and transit are all on one payment platform. So it's a seamless trip for those folks that use multiple modes during their commute or their trip. And then obviously just doing more marketing, research, and outreach, building some incentives into the system. The HOP program gives us a much more robust way of knowing what our customers want, where they're traveling, when they're traveling, and how they're using the system, so that we can target both service and outreach and incentives to those folks to improve their trips. So sorry for the length of the presentation, but a lot to go through. As you can see, we kind of peeled this onion as many ways as we could. And I think the end of the story is big long-term changes are what cause long-term changes in the system, and we have to figure out ways to adapt to those.
Questions, comments?
This is very helpful, so I thank you for it. One thing I would say is please hold on to this, because when we look at service changes now, I'm going to be asking for this kind of information and how that service change relates to this kind of. And I'm holding up the one that says where East Portlanders work.
Yeah.
That as we do service changes, to get this kind of information,
yeah,
to help us understand where that new service is going and how it will be received, would be great. So.
And that, just on that point, so this is a project that Tom worked on in Bethany, where we had that kind of information from some major employers out there. And we built the transit line around that information, where their residences were versus where their employment was. And you can see it's blue because we got major ridership increases on that section. So it does work to have that kind of information.
And I want to let you know that we are currently starting to build our proposal for the FY19 service changes. And job access is a major criterion that we're using for helping to determine what we want to advance forward in the next round of service changes.
Do you know, have other transit agencies done this kind of analysis?
So I presented at the conference in Denver, Revolution, and I don't think that there has been this deep a dive into demographic changes, but there was a lot of interest afterwards about other agencies wanting to do this similar type of analysis, as well as the folks at an organization in New York called Transit Center. It's kind of a think tank, transit think tank. They're very interested and want to dive into this type of analysis some more.
It'd be interesting to see if anybody has done this, how it corresponds to those other agencies that are actually losing major ridership.
I would really be interested to see other cities around the country and see where, I mean, in Denver, especially, Denver was almost a mirror image of Portland in regards to gentrification and displacement issues. And I would bet you they're seeing pretty similar types of changes happening.
Tom has heard me say this before. I mean, we're getting into where convenience for the occasional rider, where they may have gone to the shopping mall, they may have gone grocery shopping, and so with the advent of free delivery in a variety of things, retail establishments closing, that can be the loss for a long term of ridership that historically would have. I know I'm not the typical rider, but the first thing, if I need something, I go to the internet. And people with lower income levels have access to the internet. And Walmart's delivering for free, Amazon's delivering for a certain amount for free. And when you typically go to the mall and shop at Penny's or wherever, and they're now closed, they don't exist. And I found just this week a lot of retail establishments. Nordstrom's was just in the news, but also I went to another store and they don't have product there. You go in and you talk to them and they'll ship it to you. So there's no sense of even going to the store anymore. And you just as well go to the internet. And so I recognize that some of that is economic dependent, but I can't help but not think that that's a trend that's going to be long term. I see more and more establishments going to that. I think it's different. You know, why would I want to go into the store if I can't actually leave the store with it? But that's a trend that has emerged.
Yeah, and I think you see that in the difference between peak and off-peak and weekend travel. I think you're right, and particularly, I mean, coming in and out of downtown has always been sort of a bellwether of that kind of market. So TriMet has always been an agency, or at least in modern times, that prided itself on having a fairly strong off-peak and weekend system. So some systems are 2 peaks, morning commute, afternoon commute, and they have very little on the other hours. TriMet's really worked hard to have strong off-peak and weekend service because low-income community and transit-dependent communities really rely on that mobility in the off-peak hours. But it may be that those hours are less productive in terms of rides per hour than they historically have been. And so you have to balance this question of efficiency versus serving populations that don't have alternatives.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it also, I know that TriMet has done in the not too distant past, a look at all of our routes and reconfigured routes and things like that. And it may be that we need to do it more frequently. And as Chris said, maybe look at service boundaries again, and I'm sure that's all stuff you're doing.
Yeah.
I would just add in regards to retail, it's not just the shopper that we may be losing now or in the future, but it's the employee who's going to work maybe in the middle of the day because their shift starts at 1 o'clock. So we're losing those rides from those employees. Now, the good news is that Amazon keeps adding employees here in the region between the 3 locations that have either been up and running or have been announced. We'll have about 4,500 Amazon employees. The bad news about that is those are located in areas that are traditionally pretty difficult for us to serve because they're industrial areas that don't typically have the density of workers for us to provide service. That doesn't mean we can't serve them. In fact, this March we will be extending a line up to the Troutdale Reynolds Industrial Park to serve Amazon and FedEx. But we may also have to start accepting a higher cost per ride or a little bit less efficiency than what we usually are used to seeing for those trips to places like downtown Portland.
And we can look at differentiated fare too.
Yeah.
Well, and there's other models of deliveries, shuttle systems and so forth that are little different.
Yeah, thanks, you two. Great work. Great work. Do you know, or we know, that 6 months from now, a major employer might come? Do they come to the agency and say, hey, well, that's one of the factors to pick your city?
I wish.
And I don't mean Google, but anyway.
We do get...
I mean, that's part of attracting employees.
Yeah.
So it kind of puts us into more of a social planning position.
Typically,
To me.
yeah, no, it's a good point. And typically, what happens is the recruitment folks, so the folks that are working
Yeah.
on recruiting major employers, will come to us during that process and say, you know, Project X is looking at this site. What can you tell us about the current and future
Yeah.
service to that area?
Well, okay. I won't bring up the word tax or anything, so just leave it alone. Thank you.
Well, I guess I would say that in previous work at Portland Development Commission, it was becoming more and more common that employers who were looking at sites really viewed transit availability, proximity to a light rail, streetcar, or good bus line as a really important decision-making process for them getting their employees. Because frankly, they didn't want to have lots of land dedicated to parking.
Right.
And would rather have people get there by transit. So I think it's going to become more and more of a determinant for where people decide to site.
Yeah.
And I think it is already. The other thing I think, first off, I want to say thank you. This is really helpful. I think it's starting to answer some of the questions. I think it was Travis was here, and he and I have had some discussions about, where is the opportunity, frankly, to do the big paradigm shifts, so we are not talking about just how to, mitigate or stay where we are. How do we make the next big step in terms of increases in ridership, and what's that going to be? And I think this is helpful information, but it doesn't get us to that. So that's where I think some of the discussion about what's happening around the rest of the United States and where can we really put our investments. I think changes in the service delivery model have got to be probably part of that. I agree, but there's got to be other things too. And I don't have the ideas yet, but this is definitely getting me thinking. And I will point out the last thing is that I think I agree with you that in some ways our land use planning and our concentrations and densities are really making an impact. And I don't think we've understood that in the past and thought about what the impact could be. And it's impacting in ways that we never thought it would. So good work.
If I can just add. We don't need a park every 2 blocks.
Oh, you're talking about?
I'm talking about
land use.
being more welcome to businesses into Portland location. The business is not way out there. So, anyway, thanks.
Well, the other factor that influences businesses locating here is employable workforce, and we have a pretty low unemployment, and so
It's everywhere.
That's a
Low employment.
big factor.
Anything else for us? I think this is a really good, we'll look forward to continued discussions
Thank you.
in our budgets and service plans that you're putting together. Thank you.
I
Thanks.
just might note at your retreat in November, we'll dig into the sort of the service side of that and what that means on a sort of almost not specifically citing lines and routes in Portland, but just sort of what the trends are and how we match service and these demographic trends. I think it's getting to be increasingly important. We have 2 other presentations.
Yeah, how are we doing here?
And so we'll try to minimize your time, but they're both important, so I
Good.
hope that we can go through them. If I could ask Harry and Kurt Wilkinson to come up and do the presentation on the safety management system. And just by way of very brief introduction, you all know that we have been at work over the last 1.5 or 2 years or so actually on the safety management system, which is really a formalized approach to continuous improvement on the safety front. This is a new requirement of the Federal Transit Administration, so we have been advancing a specific plan and actions associated with that. We're ready to really roll that out in a very big way, even though as we've been developing a plan, we've been doing the training of our staff along the way. So to present that will be Harry and Kurt.
Thank you. Good morning. As Neil said, that we've been working at this for the last couple of years or so, and that the FTA Federal Transit Administration released 2 new regulations last year that essentially codified the requirement of a safety management system. Previously, the FTA did not have this formally adopted, and that's what the new regulation specifically does. They have not issued any regulation related to what the transit agencies are to do. Regardless, we thought this initiative was important enough that we were to advance it and put the processes in place. I believe that I want to go back just for a moment and say that internationally, others have adopted this safety management system. And so, all of the major airlines have adopted this type of a system. And now this is being introduced into the transit industry. So I think it's a very important initiative that will help to advance safety at TriMet, as well as the safety of other transit agencies nationally. So with that, I'd like Kurt to provide you a very brief overview of what it really entails.
Hey, good morning, almost afternoon, so I'll keep it brief. So I have a presentation we've provided you, and then I have some additional documents you'll be able to take with you that will really outline where we're going and how things really tie together from the presentation. So I'll go ahead and start. What we'll cover really quickly, how we tied the SMS planning into the business plan as well, an overview of the SMS, really what are the big components of the SMS and how will they work at TriMet, some of the goals and purposes that we're going after, and then what we've done so far to implement the SMS throughout the agency. And again, to cover what Harry said, the FTA defined the SMS and the structure that we're using. There are some others that are out there, but we're using what the FTA has put together for us, so that's what we're following. We have paired this up with the business plan, so there are elements in the SMS that are integrated into the business plan, and it's also being rolled out at the same time. So this was a good time to really start this process on the whole. In your handout, which is in the back of the packet that I have up here on the table, it has objectives intertwined within that business plan. There's 5 of them that have a significant role in the SMS, which we've crosswalked together. There's 18 objectives that have a clear support role for the SMS. So it's majorly integrated into several sections within the business plan itself. So it really makes us focus on what we're doing overall with the SMS and the business plan. This is a good graphic that just defines really how the key components work together. There are 4 components. If you start at the top, the safety management policy, we'll get into a little bit of these a little bit more, but these all work together to achieve a condition where safety risks are managed to an acceptable level. So we call that a LARP, as low as reasonably practicable. That's what we want to get to, is what are our risks, how do we manage them, how do we keep them low, and how do we ensure that they stay low over the period of time. So with the policy, there's 4 different areas that we really look into. We have our policies, which really defines how we handle safety at TriMet, who's responsible for it, how it integrates in with the public and emergency management, and then how we actually document and record all this information. So this really defines how we handle safety at every level. If we move into the next gear here, it's safety risk management. This has the processes where we go through and identify our hazards, we analyze our hazards, we determine what risk levels we have for the different hazards, and then we actually come up with mitigations for those hazards to ensure we're moving them to a lower level. As part of those, we also, any systems changes or any other risks that are identified through the process, we would evaluate those as well and ensure that we're moving those to a lower level. On the safety assurance side of things, that's the other gear that plays with the safety risk management. This is the process that evaluates the performance measurements. So we audit, we evaluate, we inspect, we use our data, we use tracking to say, are we doing what we're doing? Is it moving the arrow in the right direction? If it's not, we have to go back and look at the risk management side of things and say, well, what we were going after really didn't work. We need to look at it again and ensure that we do move it the right direction. It's also a process that will identify new hazards or changes to our environment in the transportation operations and maintenance side of things to say, hey, we have new equipment, we're running bus lines in a new neighborhood, we're extending a max line, what risks come with those, and then how do we mitigate those through our operations and maintenance employees. So it's a big effort to really tie everything together. There's a lot to look at on here, but really what this slide is meant to do is show you how that process of hazard identification, risk analysis, risk assessment, and then on the other side of things, really looking at how we use the data and what we've done to see how they play together and then actually lower that overall risk profile. And it's a continual cycle, one feeds the other. So we don't say, oh, we're done with this section of the alignment, we're not going to look at it again. It's a continual process that feeds into each other. The promotion side of things, this is the communication and dissemination of information to strengthen the safety culture and support the SMS to all areas of the transit operations and maintenance. And what we want to do is share successes and lessons learned and ensures competencies. It also gives the employees, the opportunity to have feedback into the system to say, we've brought things up, you guys have addressed them, we go back and check to see how it works. If they're happy with that, great. If not, we need to go back and see what we need to do to make them more efficient or safer processes. So it has a big impact through the agency to really share what are we doing on the whole to make safety of the employees and the public as promoted as possible. So we want to keep everybody included in that. Several goals in here that we're going after to advance safety in all processes, increase on a hazard identification. We have employees pointing out to us, where are the issues, what do we need to take care of. We also do that in my department. We perform several audits to ensure we collect the data, we analyze the data, we analyze incident and accident data to really point our risk mitigations and risk assessment operations to the places that it needs to. We want to make sure we focus our efforts on the kind of the big ticket items or where the issues are happening and then mitigate from there. We use a lot of data and organizational processes to input into our systems to see really where we need to again point our efforts. It also fosters a culture of change and encourages proactive changes within safety. So we don't want to wait for things to happen and go back and look. We want to look at our data and say, what's coming up that really could get us, what's going to be a problem before it happens, and then engage the employees on how we're going to actually correct those things before they do become an issue. So a very important part of the SMS is that overall employee involvement, listening, and feedback. So a big goal of the purpose of the SMS is to provide the overall management system for safety throughout the agency. We want to balance safety with service and allocation of resources. So we don't attack everything with full force. Everything's on a kind of a risk mitigation risk level, but we want to make sure we put the efforts and manage our risks in a balance with safety. It also provides a common framework for everyone so they know how we assess the risks and how we make the changes within the agency to adapt to those risks and evaluations that we perform. And there's a lot of work in process right now for the SMS. We have the draft plan here for you guys to review. It's really almost a final state here to get out to the employees. We're developing an implementation plan for all levels of employees, so starting with executive leadership, going down through managers, directors, and training all the way down to frontline employees, so everybody understands that we're all on the same page with the implementation of this plan. It's not just a top-down approach, really. It's everybody needs to understand what their role is within it. We're rolling out additional SMS tools, and then, of course, we use that same process with the development of this plan. We're going to continually monitor how does the plan perform, how does our training performing, how does the engagement performing, and then make any adjustments along the way. So it's a living document, living process of how this will work for TriMet on an ongoing basis. There have been some defined accountabilities and actions in 4 components, 27 of the SMS activities, and there's 9 strategic activities in place. There's a crosswalk in here in the back of this document as well that you'll be able to take a lot more detailed look at. It's about 7 pages, which really ties things together nicely. And in the end, we're trying to change this. We're doing things different. We're going to look at things a little bit different and take a different approach to see if we can have a better outcome overall in the agency as far as risk analysis, risk mitigation, and the assessment. So that's the quick way through.
So there's lots of work that's being undertaken. We hope to launch the first SMS train. Well, we've been doing training sessions building up to this for the last couple of years, but we hope to launch the first formal SMS training sessions in early November. And that will include the leadership team, every executive and director, and every other employee within the agency. That's our ultimate goal.
Obviously, this cuts across the whole agency.
Yes.
And this is at a very, very high level. Will the material you give us any specifics about what you're talking about?
Yes. So some of the tools that Kurt spoke of include manuals on how to do and perform these various components. Within that, we will clarify the roles and responsibilities.
Okay.
Every level of the organization has a role and responsibility. And that's what we will be communicating.
So have position descriptions changed to incorporate responsibilities for the safety management system?
So the current job descriptions do include a very broad statement, but to your point, I think that we do need to go back and clarify specifically what is being asked of every employee. So the short answer is yes, but we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Good job. We'll look forward to, so you're going to give us.
Yeah, I'll drop those off with
Okay,
Kelly over there. You can grab one on your way out.
And we are going to be asking the board to sign off on the plan.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Well, maybe the board wants to come to one of the meetings.
Sorry?
Say, maybe the board wants to come to one of these SMS meetings. I mean, for training.
We would hope that you would be invited to the leadership session, and we would hope the board members would attend if you're available. I promise
how many
it won't be painful.
It's okay. How much feedback or involvement are you getting from the field?
So Harry talked about the last couple of years of us providing kind of an overview. So we've already trained all of I wouldn't say, let me take back training. It's more of an introduction conversation. All the bus operators, all the rail operators, all the maintenance employees about really kind of what this means to them, where we're at, where we'd like to go, what it means to them, some things that we've done so far, and really feedback from them of how do you think this would work? How would this be different than what we're doing now? So that's a big part of it to get them engaged really early. So that's happened over the last couple of years. This is more finally the formalization of it now that the FTA came out with a framework.
Okay, thanks. Good.
Unless there's anything further, well, one more presentation we perhaps.
Thank you.
What we wanted to do was give you an overview of some of the outreach activities that are going to be underway, both related to the service plan and budget and other aspects of our work coming. I think, was Bernie going to be part of this, or did
he was?
I think he's talking to the press.
I think he's talking to the press. So
okay.
What?
All right.
Might be able to follow up with
we have both. We have two sort of related presentations. One is about the process that we need to go through for HB 2017, and the other is just a more general outreach, which I think JC is ready to jump into.
I will. Oh, excuse me. So you guys, while we're getting it pulled up on the screen, I'll just jump in. I just wanted to go over what we have planned for the outreach and engagement on 4 core topics. And on page 2, we go through those topics. It has to do with the FY 2019 budget initiatives, the service expansion that we have planned for FY 2019, the low-income fare program, and then the citation administration process. And with our outreach that we have planned, we're looking for very specific pointed feedback. I do want to note that we are, with our outreach and engagement strategy, we're using the International Association of Public Participation, their model for outreach. And quite literally, we're doing all of this to leverage our relationships and our community partners to help guide our outreach, to help inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And so we'll be doing that. We've actually done a lot of that already, but definitely putting that into practice over the next 2 months. When we look at the audiences, quite literally, it is everyone in our district, both residents and riders, underserved populations, seniors, people with disabilities, youth, diverse communities, community-based organizations, business and community leaders, neighborhood associations, and jurisdictional partners. Quite literally, it's everyone, and we'll be touching a lot of most of them. When we look at our tactics, we are using every tool in our toolkit. Ads, direct mailers, online media, using the press through earned media, onboard outreach one-on-one, online open houses, and we actually have 7 in-person open houses throughout the district that we will be hosting to bring people out to talk to them about these 4 core topics. And then we'll also be co-oping with a number of different community-based organization meetings, electeds, committee meetings, you name it. And it will all kick off, a lot of it, with the Diversity and Transit Equity Summer here in mid-October. So with our budget process, with our budget specifically, we're going to be looking at what capital projects are ahead for us. We want to talk about that not all funds are created equal. As we talk internally, it's the color of money. And then we want to talk about what's slated for FY 2019. And quite literally, a lot of that has to do with our service expansion. And as noted, we actually did do a budgetary tool that we gave. We sent out a survey, had it open for about 2.5 weeks, where we gave people $100 and they got to spend it how they thought was reasonable on our service, different service ideas. And one of them at the bottom of this is frequency versus reach. Do we add more buses on current routes, popular routes, or do we extend service into areas where we don't have service? So that reach and frequency conversation we've begun to have. And with this budgetary tool, we actually reached 4,800 people with this budgetary tool that they gave us feedback. But we've done quite a bit of outreach already around our service enhancement plans. And so what we're going back to our riders and the community to ask, are we right with some of our assumptions? Where are they traveling now? Kind of updating that feedback to really put together a robust service expansion plan. When we look at low-income fare program, obviously with the state package giving us the funding to put this into motion, we want to work with TAC to make sure it's easy to apply for and efficient to administer. But then we want some really good feedback, some thoughtful responses on how we can develop this program with an equity lens, as well as what materials do we need to produce to make sure that we are reaching everyone. And we also want to make sure that we're listening to our communities so we can get this resource into the most vulnerable hands. So again, pointed feedback that we're looking for. With the citation administration process, quite literally talking about the process and the many ways that are now available for settling a citation. And then the pointed feedback again, how much is the fine, what is appropriate, and when we look at community service, what is appropriate, how many hours should people perform to settle their citation. All of this also helps with our continual conversation about how we want to decriminalize the citation process. Now here's where the rubber meets the road, and given the time, I don't want to go through all of this, but I do want to hit some of the highlights for you, and please ask questions as we go along the way. But a lot of the work, we've already begun a lot of the outreach. And so a huge, one note for September, establishing a working group to further input on the implementation of the citation process. Again, we've begun our outreach effort. But in October, establishing a House Bill 2017 advisory committee. And in late November, early December, that's when we conclude all of our outreach efforts. And then we'll be reporting back to you and to our executive team about what those outreach efforts have found. Here, this board will have the first reading of the Low-Income Fare Program Ordinance. There will also be a public hearing associated with that. The citation process work group reviews the administrative process plan. In January, you'll have the second reading of the Low-Income Fare Program Ordinance. There will be the first reading of the Citation Process Ordinance and public hearing. And in February, that's actually when we'll release the proposed FY 2019 service plan. You'll have the second reading of the citation process. And we begin, and you'll see some notations where we're beginning to develop various marketing and educational materials, not only because of the feedback, but also from your input from the readings, as well as the public hearings. March, we're looking at March of next year. So I said that we released the 2019 service plan. Neil will release his budget that includes that service plan, and we'll go back out to the public for yet another round of outreach. What that looks like, we don't know just yet, but we'll put together a plan. Another big piece, the HB 2017 draft plan recommendation will be out for review. In April 2018, this is where a lot of stuff gets going, where the beta test for the low-income fare program comes to be, as well as a potential for the beta test on the citation process. So that's huge. You'll also in April see the first reading of the service expansion effort, as well as a public hearing around that. Again, the HB 2017, that's when that final plan recommendation comes to fruition. May, you'll have the second reading of the service expansion, and you will, for consideration, the budget adoption through a resolution. JPAC will review the HB 2017 recommended plan. And you'll also see we're starting to gear up. When you look at July, that's when we launch the low-income fare program and launch the citation process. So there will be a lot of work up to that for us to launch it in July. I will just quickly point out in June that this board will consider adopting the HB 2017, the overall plan. Just some quick hits. The first installment of that FY 2019 service expansion hits in next September. The second installment hits in March. And a year from now, we'll begin outreach on the FY 2020 budget and service expansion plan. And then just a quick note, when it comes to House Bill 2017, we actually receive our first funding allocation in January of 2019. So quite a lot is going to be going on with us reaching out to the community, talking to community members and getting their feedback. I wanted to touch on some of the challenges, and that's just reaching all of these people. But and we have a lot of different messages. Just the cost in trying to reach all of these people and the staffing is pretty robust. But quite literally, we have been doing a lot of this. We've been reaching out to a lot of our community-based organizations already. They know it's coming. I'm pretty comfortable in that we're in a good position. And with that, I'll turn it over for any questions about what we have planned for our outreach efforts.
I guess thanks for letting us know how busy we're going to be for the next few months here.
I just have a quick question for Neil. With the low-income fare program, we already had one. Has a decision been made about whether to combine those efforts?
So when we come to you with the fare ordinance, we'll come to you with a recommendation related to that. To some extent, they have different markets and serve different needs. And I think that segments, frankly, more tightly than more firmly than I probably saw, in initial thinking. So we'll be sharing that with you as we bring forward the ordinance.
And then a question for JC. A lot of political candidates, retail organizations, they employ companies that do market segmentation and market research. Has TriMet ever employed such an agency?
For that type of market segmentation, I think that we haven't, although we do have contractors on board to help with this. And a lot of them are actually multicultural contractors to help us.
Because language matters.
Yes.
And the same thing said a different way to different segments of the market help to enhance behavior. And, political candidates use it, all kinds of organizations use it. So I just didn't know if you'd ever had that kind of market segmentation analysis done within the Portland metro market. I'm sure other agencies have. And sometimes you can piggyback on the work that they've already
I do know
gathered.
Metro has done some of that work as well. Metro, I believe, has done some of that work as well. in
Because
terms of
that
the-
is absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating,
Yeah.
what that turns up, that you wouldn't typically even, just living here, know about. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can people add comments now? Is there a website to go to?
It will be actually by the beginning of next week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So we wanted Bernie also just to review, you all know about HB 2017, the new transportation package, and it requires us to go through some paces. And so Bernie's going to describe a little bit of that and how that integrates into the outreach program that JC outlined.
So just to, I'll try to do this as quickly as I can. The new legislation requires us to submit a plan to the Oregon Transportation Commission, and they need to approve that plan before we receive funding. It's not like our existing tax base where we receive the money regardless. It's not automatic. So we have to put together a plan. And there are a couple of factors that the legislature has asked us to address in the plan. It doesn't require anything in particular, but it asks for consideration of how we're extending routes to low-income communities, whether we're purchasing gas or electric buses, reducing fares for low-income, and coordination of services inside and outside of the districts. The tax goes into effect July 1 of 2018, and that's why we've targeted the low-income fare to go into place at that same time so that those match up. Although we don't actually receive any funding until January of 2019. ODOT's drafting a rule for how this will be implemented. That they're targeting May of next year to get that done. Some factors to think about in terms of rolling out new service. We have about a 2-year lag when we make a decision to buy additional buses. It takes about 2 years for those to show up on site. And as JC just outlined, we're currently planning for September of 18 and March of 19 in terms of rolling out service. So in order for us to start thinking about how the new 2017, House Bill 2017 funds would be used, we need to start thinking now and begin the process so that we can meet some of these lead times. You know about the low-income fare, so I'm not going to go into that. We anticipate at this point that we probably wouldn't be able to put all of the new resource out on the street in the first year because we don't have the buses, we don't have the operators, we don't have the community feedback yet. So we're looking at a 5+ year phase in for those new funds, and we'll be bringing that to you. We're planning to use the service enhancement plan as the framework for having the conversation with the community since we've already gotten a lot of feedback on that. I talked earlier about the demographics and ridership, so that will be an important part of what we take to the community to get their input. What I want to focus on here is that you need to establish an advisory committee that helps develop this plan that then goes to the Transportation Commission. And it's quite explicit in the legislation that it's an advisory committee to the board rather than to the general manager. So all the public meeting rules and so forth apply. It won't be, it will be a very public and outward-facing committee.
Question, are we going to help ODOT? You said, can you go back a slide or two? You said ODOT's going to have something.
This is their, so their final rule, they're drafting their rules.
Are we going to
now.
have any input into that?
Yes, so we'll be on the technical advisory committee to that rulemaking, So just, although we haven't gotten a lot of input yet, we know that making our current frequent service more frequent is an issue that we hear a lot about from the community and is embedded in the service enhancement plans. Adding new frequent service lines is also something the community has asked for. Changing routes or extending routes and new lines. These are the south-north kinds of lines in East Portland that I talked about, and employment access. So all those will be issues that we'll be exploring with the advisory committee. What I want to do right now is get your blessing to begin recruiting folks for the advisory committee, so that we can get them up and running now, and they can get their sort of initiation to the TriMet planning process through this FY19 cycle, and then we'll carry them through into next summer, and they'll do the larger, longer range plan development at that point. So these are the categories, sort of broad categories of folks that we would like to recruit. Obviously, we want to have geographic representation around the TriMet district. Folks who are transit dependent or heavy transit users, such as seniors and people with disabilities. We want to have youth represented, communities of color, the environmental community, employers, education, and then alternative mode providers. And here we're thinking of the shuttles and ride connections of the world, the folks that we connect with, as well as representatives from the bike ped community.
Gender balance.
And gender balance, of course, it would be something that we would want to see in the committee as well. So if there is no objection, or unless there is some other group in addition to gender balance on that you would like us to think about, what I'd like to do is get your okay to begin recruiting, and then what we would do is next month bring back the final list to you and for your approval.
Look forward to seeing that list.
Okay, so just in terms of big questions that will be teed up through this process, obviously responding to demand and growing ridership, as we talked about, balancing the ability to get buses on site and park them, and employee training and getting the right mix of operators and mechanics on site, and then some other strategic questions like diesel or electric, when and if we want to start converting our stream of buses to battery electric, traditional versus articulated buses, a fourth bus operating center, and those enhanced transit corridors, and how much investment we might want to make in that as we go forward will be some of the questions that we tee up for this group.
Question I have, and maybe Neil's the best one to answer it. I know that the increases in employer tax is tied to expansion. It looks like a lot of this is tied to expansion. Where does that leave us in terms of replacement?
Well, actually, that's an interesting balance, and that will be coming to you. One of the things we look at as we put together the capital plans is how much capital, for example, goes into the replacement. And we've done a lot, for example, over the last few years to really accelerate the bus replacement aspects. Yeah. We've got the PAL garage reconstruction in the capital plan, and that's underway. And so we'll bring to you that stream of capital improvements. The other interesting thing that is sort of going on at the same time is a much more focused look on what we call transit asset management, or TAM for short. But it is actually a more rigorous review of our assets, replacement cycles, that sort of thing. And that will, I think, better inform some of those trade-off decisions that we'll have. I don't think there's any, you're right, I think that the new revenue is focused on primarily for expansion of service, but obviously there is a scope of capital that is going to be required to bring that service on board. Everybody wants to see the bus, but you know, there's also a bus garage and a mechanic,
I was going to say,
and a place to park the bus at night, and all the other components that really. I talk about with people about the ballet that goes on every night as the bus is brought into the garage, and the work that goes on to it to get it ready for the service the next day, and same with the rail vehicles. So, well, part of what this committee will do is hopefully get very educated about all of that and begin to help you as well with that balancing decision that we see coming forward.
Yeah, because there's a huge capital impact.
Yes.
I know our bus garages are already to capacity, aren't they?
They are very close to that, and as we move to the reconstruction of the Powell, we'll actually be, frankly, a bit over capacity, and we've got to find some temporary mechanisms as we move. For example, I think the number is about 60 buses we've got to remove from the Powell site while we rebuild the structure. We'll be able to actually add back more, up to 100 more buses to that site when we're done, but there is pain to be borne during that period.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Thank you. Very
Thanks.
informative.
Daunting.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Anything else, Mr. General Manager? You have
I
some-
think we're done. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Super, thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of stuff.
Well, hopefully we'll get that figured out, because that's no good. You'll like it a lot better.
Well, I'm just always worried about
Not coughing, you cough too, do you get coughs?
really dealing with the needs.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're right. You're
That's common.
100% right. No.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is that stuff.
That's good.
Oops.
He broke it.
Yeah, too, 'cause
He's a thirsty man.